If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead no more than 10 minutes. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that 2 dirty bombs, or possibly a suitcase nuke, will explode in Manhattan, New York City on March 22nd, 2025. There will be a large-scale evacuation from Manhattan Island. Martial law will be declared in the U.S. I am predicting that on April 26, 2025, Israel will bomb, possibly with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear and energy weapons facilities. It is also possible that the U.S. will also bomb Iran alongside Israel on April 26th. I am also predicting that a nuclear bomb will be detonated on June 8, 2025. It is possible that April 26, 2025 is a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran on June 8th. It is also possible that June 8th is also a step in the trail of signs leading to another date in the future on which Israel will bomb Iran and a date on which a nuclear bomb will be detonated. If that is the case, we can expect clear and relevant prophetic signs to occur on April 26th and June 8th. It is predicted that on June 9th, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to the 5th trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens. The demons pretending to be aliens will claim to be here to help us with our nuclear weapons, and it is possible that June 9th will be the day Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. At some point, there will be a massive Mary apparition that will deceive the masses, because all Mary apparitions in history have been demons pretending to be Mary. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist, and 5G frequencies. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. If June 9th is not the date for these events, there will be a relevant prophetic sign or prophetic signs, which will make June 9th a step in the trail of signs leading to the date of the symbolic beginning of these things. I am predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. It is predicted that on August 6th, 2025, the historic barge that has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River for over 100 years will finally break free and crash over Niagara Falls. The reason for this is that Niagara Falls is Noah's flood symbolism, and the barge was involved in the most dramatic rescue in the history of Niagara Falls, symbolic of Noah's Ark. Niagara in the native language means straight, narrow way, and Niagara's Horseshoe Falls is perfectly aimed at the CN Tower in downtown Toronto, because Toronto and its tower are symbolic of the Tower of Babel. In a game of horseshoes, the object is to aim the horseshoe and throw it at the metal stick, which is why the Horseshoe Falls is perfectly aimed at the metal stick that is the CN Tower. God is communicating that as testament for those who will live in the 1,000 years of Christ's reign on earth, the geography of North America will, as a result of a massive earthquake, be divided by a body of water from the Great Lakes to the Mississippi Delta. This destruction will be judgment on America and Canada for attempting to divide God's land, Israel. When this happens, the water in the Great Lakes will spill out over southern Ontario and Toronto. I am predicting that a solar flare will erupt on the surface of the sun and send a coronal mass ejection that will hit Earth on August 13th, 2025, which will knock out America's power grid and will lead to food shortages. The hit of the coronal mass ejection, predicted for August 13th, that will knock out the power grid will also knock many planes out of the sky. I am predicting that on August 30th, in the North America time zones, and on August 31st in the Asia time zones, there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit of Earth in the Indian Ocean. The greatest seismic effect of this will be felt on the other side of the globe, which is North America, and this will trigger an eruption of Yellowstone volcano and will cause the volcano in the Canary Islands to collapse into the Atlantic Ocean and send a mega tsunami towards the east coast. The asteroid will also trigger a mega landslide on Hawaii Island that will trigger a mega tsunami that will hit the west coast. It will also trigger the collapse of the Hoover Dam, which will cause a water panic in California, and many other devastating earthquakes. Michelle Obama will, quote unquote, win the election over J.D. Vance on November 7th, 2028, and will become the president on January 20th, 2029. She will stack the Supreme Court, and she will appoint Barack Obama as her vice president, and then she will step down, making Barack Obama the 50th president. This is speculation, but it could be that there will be a movement to make Trump the president for a third term, arguing that he is eligible because he hasn't served 2 consecutive terms. And if so, this will backfire, as it will lead the way for Barack Obama to serve a third term that isn't consecutive. The day of the Lord, the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, Judgment Day, will be at the end of 2031. Unless there are multiple rapture events, the resurrection rapture event will not occur before Pentecost on June 4th, 2028. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived, and more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Make a note right now of these alternative platforms that you can find me on in case you can't find me later. This video is filled with non-stop, profound information. It is one of the most important videos on this channel. All right, a quick introduction to this truly profound video and diagram that you are looking at, this beautiful thing that is from God. I just want to say that January 13th, this video was originally produced prior to January 13th, and it ended up being a step in the trail of science. God was overwhelmingly pointing to this date, and so it was believed that this would be the date for the predicted dirty bombs and evacuation in Manhattan. And what I mean is God was overwhelmingly pointing to this date in terms of this. And this is how it works, all right? It works in terms of developed trails of signs. Because it would be one thing for God to tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, tell the world that such and such is going to happen on such and such date. But what good would that really be? Besides being more proof for the righteous Christian God of the Bible, which isn't insignificant. And on that note, in terms of an evangelism tool, this video will be incomparable to anything else. But with the prediction when it comes to pass. But what God is doing here is through the connections and through the developed trails of signs, which involve steps. And it's not possible to know whether the date that God's pointing to ahead of time will be the end of the trail of signs regarding that particular event, in this case, the dirty bombs in Manhattan, or a step in which there will be clear and relevant signs on that date that will reveal more information that will further develop the big picture of signs and further develop down the line in terms of time, the trail of signs leading to the date of the end event that God is pointing to. By doing that, well, first of all, none of God's signs, well, maybe I shouldn't say none. Maybe there's the odd exception that I'm not thinking about. But God's prophetic signs cannot be properly or fully understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs. And this is the thing that the vast majority of people that are, quote unquote, watching for the signs do not appreciate, which is why they have missed the vast majority of the prophetic signs. They're not even recognizing the vast majority of the prophetic signs, many of which are contained in this diagram, for example. I shouldn't say many. This isn't even a fraction of a percent of the signs. Don't get me wrong. There's literally thousands, and the majority of them have been completely missed by those who are watching for signs because they're not appreciating what I just said. But in order for all of that to happen, in order for God to communicate all of this, he needs to point to these dates ahead of time, and it's not necessarily possible to know ahead of time whether or not it will be the end of the trail or another step. Now, in this case, I'm pretty sure the date didn't come and go, and I recognized prior to the date that it would only be a step. And maybe I even mentioned that in this video, I forget. Regardless, it was a step, and I'll just say briefly because I explain it in other videos. This was the day of the comet and its perihelion, which symbolizes the comet. And the comet itself is a nuclear explosion symbolic sign, because the comet is about its nucleus that exploded, it fragmented after it reached perihelion or during perihelion, etc. It had a nuclear shadow tail and all that, okay? Also, it was the day that the moon eclipsed, or rather occulted, Mars. Mars is symbolic of war in God's signs because of an ancient astrology, that being the case, including ancient Semitic astrology. And also, God has revealed through his pattern of signs regarding the predicted events of the dirty bomb explosions. He's been revealing this pattern of moon signs, and specifically after this, it was later recognized that it was going to be the half moon. Prior to that, it was recognized that God was pointing to the blood moon lunar eclipse, which was on March 13th. 2025. But before that, it was recognized that even that would be a step pointing to the next half moon phase, long story short. Well, all right. And so that's a brief synopsis of this prophetic sign that occurred on this date. Now, this date connects with 68 days first of all, it connects with 2 months and 9 days, which hints at 29, and God uses the number 29 to hint at the moon, or to symbolize the moon, as it has a lunar cycle of 29 and a half days. But also, this connection is 68 days, and the number 68 is the equivalent of the word bomb in Hebrew gematria, and is equivalent of the name Obama in Hebrew gematria. And God is using Obama and his name to hint at Obama, which is why, for example, the Barak bombings in Beirut, the Beirut bombings hint at Barack. And they were exactly 444 months after the first UN session in New York City. And the Barak bombings were about the peacekeeping UN troops, or affiliated with the UN. Now that date, that bombing that hinted at Barack, the Barak bombings, was 21,600 minutes before the Capitol building was bombed in 1983. And 21,600 minutes is 15 days, but it hints at 216. 216 is 6 times 6 times 6, the number that symbolizes the Antichrist. But Barack Obama was born on the 216th day of the calendar year. Also, though, and most importantly, the name Barack is equal to 216 in English gematria. And so from the Barack bombings, we have a number that symbolizes the name Barack to the Capitol building bombing. And that's because the Capitol building bombing was done by the May 19th perpetrated by the May 19th Communist Organization, of which Barack Obama was a member of in 1983, before it disbanded in 1985 and Barack Obama moved to Chicago to follow in his father's footsteps in community street activism, his father being Frank Marshall Davis, who was a leader in the communist movement in Chicago before he moved to Hawaii and knocked up Barack Obama's 18-year-old mother. All right. Marshall, speaking of which, hints at martial law that's coming as a result of things, including the predicted dirty bombs. But there'll be more events that will also lead to martial law in the future. So anyway, that's a long story short. I explained more, but when the prediction comes to pass, the purpose of it is to prove these controversial things that I'm explaining, including the fact that Barack Obama was a member of the May 19th Communist Organization, which, by the way, was a spin-off of the Weather Underground, which was led by Bill Ayers. And Barack Obama got his start in politics in Chicago with the help of Bill Ayers, whom he met at Columbia University in New York City. And that's another long story. But Bill Ayers wrote his autobiography, and that's a fact. It's not a conspiracy theory. You can look that up. Bill Ayers is on video. You can find that even on YouTube, of him saying that he wrote Barack Obama's autobiography, Dreams from My Father. Well, anyway, not to get any further off on track, but I had to, I guess, establish the significance of the 68 days, which is symbolic of bomb and Obama. And that gets us from this date to the prediction. Now, the rest of this video will explain this amazing information that's contained in this diagram. You will be astounded. All right, welcome. It is a huge pleasure of mine to present this diagram to you. I said in an email to some friends recently that this diagram is the definition of a big picture of signs. This diagram, the information you are looking at, is truly sacred. This information has been developing for years now, and we can see it all come together. It was all meant all along for the purpose of this diagram. What I am saying is that these signs that I'll be speaking about are for the purpose of demonstrating this diagram. in order to know God's timing. Now, the different signs in themselves, as I'll explain, isolated also point to this date, that it is predicted that a suitcase nuke bomb, or maybe dirty bombs, will explode in Manhattan on January 13th, 2025. But taken all together, they form a big picture. And God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is only being explained on this channel. And there are reasons why that is. This channel will be the only place you will hear many critically important messages from that God is communicating through his big picture of signs. Things that are, for example, controversial, that are confirmed. Debates are ended. Certain debates are ended with God's big picture of signs, which will be proven to be true when the prediction comes to pass. And that is the purpose of this prediction. And make no mistake, I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. And like I say, it is to prove the things that I am saying in these videos along the way, while explaining God's big picture of signs, through which he has told stories. Many, many stories that reveal extremely important information and knowledge that he is able to communicate through the stories, through the different trails of connected signs. And none of the prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections with the other signs, as fully illustrated in this diagram. Something that those that are interested in prophetic signs are not fully aware of. And that's why even the vast majority of the prophetic signs have been completely missed, because they're not recognizing them through the prior signs that God is communicating these stories, through which God is communicating these stories, these themes, if you will. And that's why this will, I'm sure, be the only place you will hear of it being predicted ahead of time that a suitcase nuke or dirty bomb is about to explode in Manhattan. This precision is only possible through appreciating God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. Now, regarding this theme of this explosion in New York City that's expected, this was recognized in July of 2019. But as we can even see in this diagram, but of course it goes back beyond this diagram. In fact, it off the top of my head goes back to the 1920 Wall Street bombing in 1920. That's part of the big picture of signs. I mean, it goes back, of course, before what we see in this diagram. But actually, the earliest date we see in this diagram is the official start date of the Manhattan Project to develop the first atomic bomb. And that's what we are talking about here. We are talking about either a dirty bomb made of atomic nuclear material or, in fact, a suitcase nuke. I'm leaning to the latter, much more so. Because as a result, martial law will be declared and Trump will not become the president. And that is the reason why this will happen, and therefore I cannot see how dirty bombs will achieve this. Furthermore, God has communicated through his big picture of signs, and it's been confirmed that he is using suitcase theme, a theme of suitcases, including, for example, Joe Biden's appointee to I forget the name of the department, but it's the Department for Nuclear Energy. He appointed the transgender guy that was ultimately fired for being the suitcase the suitcase thief. You know who I'm talking about. His name is Sam Brinton. He was arrested a couple of times, I think, during the time that he was this head of this department for stealing suitcases. This nuclear energy and what to do disposal of nuclear waste department. I mean, that's so obvious when we have the eyes to see what God is, the theme that God is communicating, that this Sam Brinton is just one example, and he's not even in this diagram. And I mentioned that because this diagram is truly just a small slice of what God has been communicating regarding the big picture of signs regarding the predicted explosion in Manhattan. I mean, it's massive. It's so huge. This is a small part. But what we see in this diagram are some of the very, very top main signs, these and main hubs, if you will, nodes in the web, because it's an interconnected web. And what you are seeing here are these dates that are like the main hubs, nodes in the web. That's why you have this theme of the 13th of the month occurring throughout this diagram here. God has cleverly, to make it easy for us, designed it that it would be easily recognized what date the bomb would be, and it would be on the 13th of the month because of what I've just said. Now, speaking of which, the first sign here in this diagram, although it wasn't recognized at this time that God was communicating an explosion in Manhattan, like I said, that was recognized on this 13th of the month in July of 2019. But on January 13th, which is the date of the predicted bomb, in 2018 was the Hawaii false missile alert, which went for over a half an hour, if I recall correctly. And I'm going to mention this here too before I continue. I'm only giving a surface level explanation, and it's coming solely from memory. I have no script in front of me, no notes. I'm just going by memory here, and believe me, a lot of it's solidified in my memory because God has repeatedly pointed to these signs over and over and over again with other dates that you are not even seeing in this diagram. That's how it works, and I believe that's why he did it, is to become redundant. I mean, there's far more connections, for example, from this date and these other dates than what's illustrated in this diagram. But like I'm saying, these are the main nodes and main connections. So this is like the top level, simplified, if you will. Before I continue as well, I did speak a minute ago about God developing these trails and different stories, many of them. And there are 50 videos that explain the different trails and different stories that God told that led to February 3rd, 2024. These videos are 100% correct. The analysis in these videos is 100% correct. This will be proven when the prediction comes to pass. When the prediction comes to pass on January 13th, 2025, it'll prove that this is how it works, okay? They're steps in the trails of signs. It wasn't incorrect. It wasn't quote-unquote wrong. When I made 50 videos that predicted February 3rd, 2024, they were not quote-unquote wrong. Now, you are welcome to think that they were before the prediction comes to pass, but not after. When the prediction comes to pass, it proves that these 50 videos that predict February 3rd, 2024 are 100% correct. Now, the reason why I emphasize this and promote these videos is because they must be watched. What I am saying is that the purpose of this prediction is not for us to go, oh, cool, neat. You predicted this ahead of time, God. No. The purpose of the prediction is to prove that this is how it works, and it's for the purpose of confirming the trails of signs that enable God to tell these stories, and through which he is communicating extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know. Now, I realize that's a lot of videos, and I don't know what to tell you. I'm just the messenger. But I do know that God did this for a reason. And so you need to watch the other videos that point to February 3rd. I could not continue to update those videos. It was just too much. Between February 3rd and January 13th, 2025, there are other nodes, other steps. I couldn't continue to update 50 videos plus all of the new information every time there was a new step in the trail. Because before the date, it's not necessarily possible, although sometimes it is, to know in advance if it's only going to be a step or the end of the trail regarding the particular theme, in this case, the predicted date of the bomb explosion. Now, without going into any details, the prophetic signs that confirmed all of the analysis on February 3rd were the 2 long-range bombers that were launched that bombed targets in 2 nations, Iraq and Syria, in response to the drone attack at the Tower 22 base. And the mission took 2 times 22 hours, and the mission began on the date 2/2. In fact, God was in reality pointing to a date in the Hebrew calendar that begins at sunset and ends on sunset. God was actually pointing to the date 2/2 and 2/3, February 2nd and February 3rd in the Gregorian calendar. Okay, and so that's the clear, and there's more reasons for, like I said, to confirm the second and third witnesses that confirm what I just said is the prophetic relevant sign. But in other words, there's a lot to that story, but I'm not going to tell it in this video because that's not what the purpose of this video is about. This video is about the big picture. It's not about the individual story. All right, so anyway, you get the idea. You need to go back and find the other videos and go find them. Go find them. Go back into the catalog, all right? This isn't a video channel that is a weekly update on the latest news events. That's not this channel. This channel should be treated like a library where you go back in and find the other videos and see what God has been communicating all of these years, because it's all relevant and extremely important. So let's start with the Hawaii false missile alert. The first thing to say is that the big theme, the bigger overarching theme of the big picture of signs, well, one of the overarching themes, I wouldn't say it's the top one. They're really closely related, though. The main theme is God's warning of judgment for the church, because as Peter said, judgment begins with the church. And that message you will only hear on this channel. How God is extremely displeased with the church, specifically the American church, and specifically the American evangelical church. But God reproves whom he loves. But that's not to say that there's massive problems. And that's the reason for the Antichrist. Now, through the big picture of science, God is constantly identifying who the Antichrist is. So much for the guessing game that evangelicals like to play regarding the identity of the Antichrist, because it isn't a guessing game. The first of the 2 Antichrists, Pope Francis, was identified clearly, beyond a reasonable doubt, in Old Testament prophecy. Even before the time of Jesus, it was clear that the first of the 2 Antichrists would be a pope. That knowledge was necessary for the Reformation. There wouldn't have been a Reformation without that knowledge, but it's shameful, absolutely shameful, that the Protestant church has lost this knowledge. And it is through the heretical doctrine that has them misinterpret 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and on and on. That's another subject. I'm not going to get into that. I've explained it too many other times as well. But the point is that the second of the 2 Antichrists is from Hawaii. That's why the Hawaii false missile alert. That lasted for over a half hour. There was panic on the island for over a half an hour, and the thought was that there was a missile fired at it from probably, I guess, North Korea. Okay, so that was January 13th. That's exactly 7 years, which is the period of time in Bible prophecy, the most central prophecy in the Bible, that symbolizes the period of the end times and the Antichrist. Now, it is only symbolic, and we have already passed through it. And I know what that sounds like to those that don't know this yet. But make no mistake, The purpose of this prediction from God is to prove this. When the prediction comes to pass, case closed. End of debate. It is time to discard the 7-year timelines that people think have not begun yet. It was only symbolism. There were a number of symbolic beginnings of the 7 years in 2017, the first year of Trump's presidency. One of them being, for example, the 7 years in between the two eclipses. We've already passed the 7 years. End of debate. But it's symbolism, and that's why God is using this 7 years connection right here. And also, by the way, some of the symbolic sevens were, in fact, in early 2018. And this is one of them. In fact, you were looking at one of the symbolic 7 years. Because when this bomb goes off, 7 years exactly after the false missile alert, this will, in fact, begin the tribulation, if you will, the chaos, the destruction of America. Because the 7 years were, if you will, essentially 7 years of prophetic warning signs. Of course, there was tribulation. We had the CVD disease and all that, and the mark of the Antichrist. Because it's all symbolism. But anyway, we're going to get really going here exactly 7 years later. And that's why this January 13th, 2018 date is, in fact, one of many beginnings of the symbolic 7. Okay? Now, 7 years is also 84 months. That's extremely relevant because the word bomb in Hebrew gematria is equal to 84. Not only that, but the name of the Antichrist, Obama, is equal to 84 in Hebrew gematria. And this isn't an accident. This is designed by God because this Obama president is from Hawaii. And so from the Hawaii false missile alert, we have exactly 84 months, which identifies bomb and Obama to the date of the predicted bomb that will result in Obama becoming the Antichrist again because of the ensuing martial law and what's going to happen to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And in an emergency, Michelle Obama will be made the president, and she will appoint Barack Obama as her vice president. Then she will step down, he'll become the president, thus overcoming the 22nd Amendment's restriction on someone being elected more than twice. He will be appointed instead, just like Gerald Ford, who was never elected vice president or president. So you see how important this connection is. This 7 years and 84 months. This is pure Antichrist symbolism. I do not see how January 13th, 2025 could be possibly another step. Anything is possible, knowing the Lord. I do recognize that. I'm not saying that the Lord is would change his mind. What I'm saying is that having studied his big picture of signs from morning until night for more than full-time hours for 7 years, and having the experience of multiple, steps along the way. I mean, like, for example, on April 13th, the evidence was so overwhelming, you aren't even seeing the half of it. For April 13th, you aren't even seeing a fraction of it, actually. That I thought, well, there's no way that the dirty bomb could be any later than that date, but it ended up being another step. But anyway, this March 13th is the end. Even the sign on this April 13th date revealed this date because of the 21-year-old document leaker and this 21 months connection. Now, the next thing to, I guess, get into here is this date, because this was when it was first recognized that this theme is a bomb in Manhattan, because we had the Manhattan blackout. And I'll explain what caused the epiphany. This Manhattan blackout was exactly 42 years after the New York City blackout that caused a blackout for 9 million people, which was caused incidentally by lightning. 2 lightning strikes at different locations that made it what the secular people call the biggest coincidence. that took out the two power stations that supplied New York City. And the name Barak in Hebrew means lightning. Okay? Now, it was actually exactly 110 minutes shy of an exact 42 years. 42 years because in Bible prophecy, 42 months is mentioned 7 times as being symbolic of the period of the Antichrist. And 110 minutes because on 9/11, it was 110 stories that collapsed in God's judgment. There was 9/11 signs in the Manhattan blackout. The Manhattan blackout is so huge. There's an entire video dedicated to this, and incidentally, that video leads to February 3rd. It's why I am saying you need to watch the February 3rd videos that predict the bomb. I'm not going to go update that video, because if I update that video, why wouldn't I update any of the others? They're all important. And they're all extremely important. You don't get it. You don't know about the Manhattan blackout until you watch that video. And even then you won't know the whole story because the Manhattan blackout is so huge, actually. So much was involved. So many different aspects of the sign that are about the different themes. I'm just focusing here on the theme of the dirty bombing or suitcase nuke in Manhattan. And on that note, so we had the blackout occurred in the area of Hell's Kitchen, the Manhattan blackout, not the New York City blackout in 1977. And it was kept to that area, and it also did half of Broadway, because in Matthew 7:13, which is why the date 7:13, July 13th, Jesus said the broad is the way to destruction, but narrow is the way to life. And that's why half of Broadway was in the dark and the other half, the other side of the street, wasn't. So the blackout was isolated to a particular area, mostly in Hell's Kitchen. There's reasons for Hell's Kitchen. One of the signs was the impromptu street performance by the musical Hades Town, which rhymes with Hell's Kitchen, right? The story of the Manhattan blackout was that it was during the peak of the heat wave and there were people outside on the streets during the night suffering because their air conditioners weren't working. They were suffering in Hell's Town or Hell's Kitchen, the Hell's Kitchen area. Okay, and it just goes on and on because it also connects to the Hell's Gate Canyon flood in Kenya later that year. So anyway, because one of the theaters that was flooded because of the blackout was the Lion King movie, the musical, I should say, and the location that inspired the movie The Lion King was Hell's Gate Canyon National Park in Kenya, and on and on. I'm about to go off onto an unnecessary tangent, which, by the way, is the extreme difficulty in explaining God's big picture of signs because it isn't a linear document. It isn't linear. It isn't two-dimensional. It is three-dimensional. It is infinite. And when you try to pull one part of the web, you end up pulling the entire web. It's the same with the Bible, though, by the way. The Bible isn't a linear document. It is interconnected. Everything is interconnected. One can take an infinite number of pathways through the Bible, and everything confirms on each other. You know, one passage from this particular part of the Bible confirms another part of the Bible, and it's all interconnected. It all confirms itself. That's the nature of the big picture of signs, the true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. It's extremely difficult to explain. But we had the Hawaii false missile alert, the home of the Antichrist, or at least where he grew up. And that's why we have this exact 6 + 6 + 6 months connection to the Manhattan blackout. Because 666 is the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. Now, the thing about the Manhattan blackout is that it occurred on the same day as Hurricane Barry. And Hurricane Barry hit the 6 + 6 + 6th state to join the Union. Hence the 6 + 6 + 6 months connection. And Hurricane Barry was known for the power outages that it caused. In fact, well, It was a prophetic 153,000 customers that were without power. Now, the name Barry is Barack Obama's original name. He changed his name as an adult from Barry to Barack. Who does that? Who changes their name from what American changes their name from a good American name to a very foreign Muslim sounding name? Why would you do that? Well, it's because of who Barack Obama is. Someone that does not love America. And I'll prove that to you. 5 days before his first election, he at a campaign rally said, "We are 5 days away from radically transforming America." That's a quote. Who wants to radically transform America? Okay, if you have a spouse and they want to radically transform you, they don't love you. That's obvious, right? You would never say that of your spouse that you want. You might want to improve your spouse, of course. You know, a wife will want to improve her husband. It's natural. But if you radically want to transform your spouse, you don't really love your spouse. And that's the same with those on the left, like Barack Obama. That's just scratching the surface of the truth of who Obama is. And I've talked about this in other videos, but what I've forgotten to mention during those diatribes is the must-watch documentary that explains a lot about who he is. The documentary titled "The Real Dreams," Dreams from My Real Father. Okay, Dreams, because that's the name of his autobiography that he didn't write, by the way, which Bill Ayers even says. And you can find that on video. It's not a conspiracy theory. He says he wrote his autobiography, Dreams from My Father. Obama didn't write it. It's one of the I guess the first lie, if you will, first public lie of thousands that Obama has told. And so anyway, let's get off that subject. But it was Hurricane Barry on the same day. Now, also one of the prophetic signs on this day was the explosion of the boat on Table Rock Lake. Now, it was an explosion, but it occurred on Table Rock Lake, which makes it prophetic, because of the duck boat tragedy on Table Rock Lake a year earlier, which, by the way, hinted at the number 153, speaking of the 153,000 customers without power in the 6+6+6 state, which, by the way, is Louisiana, and Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash in St. Louis, which will lead to the rise of the Antichrist. But this boat explosion, I'll just get into it because of the 153 connection here, so I might as well explain it. The duck boat tragedy in 2018, July 19th, was on Table Rock Lake. In the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus. The number 220 in God's signs is symbolism for Jesus, because G220 is the word for rooster in the Greek concordance, which symbolizes Peter. Okay, for centuries, Catholics, for example, have put roosters on top of their cathedrals because of this. And Peter's name means rock. Jesus named Simon Peter, changed his name to Petros in Greek, which means rock. It means a stone or a pebble or a rock. And Petra means bedrock. That's the feminine. Two different meanings. When Jesus said to Simon that his name is Petros, he then followed that statement up with, "On this Petra I will build my church." Now, Catholics say that Jesus said that he was going to build his church on Peter, but they're two different words. But furthermore, why in the world would Jesus say that? That's blasphemy. Of course, he isn't building his church on a man. If you understand the Bible correctly, man is inherently corrupt and wicked. That's why in that same chapter, just a few verses later, Jesus called Peter Satan. In the same chapter. And the Catholics say that Jesus said he was building his church on Peter, yet just right after that, he called Peter Satan. But what does one build a structure on? bedrock. So, of course, Jesus was saying he was going to build his church on the Petra, the rock of truth. Jesus said the rock of truth that Peter had just stated. Because prior to Jesus saying these things, Jesus asked his disciples, who do they think he is? And Peter was the first to state out loud that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah. And then Jesus said, Simon, you are Petros. On this Petra of truth, this rock of truth that you've just stated, I'm going to build my church. The church is built on Christ, not Peter. That's very key. But when this passage is properly explained, it 100% disproves the entire Catholic religion. Because the entire Catholic religion hinges on this one verse. Because the entire Catholic religion is rooted in this belief that popes have the authority to make up all of this man-made tradition and religion on top of the Bible. I mean, that's a fact, right? If you're a Catholic and you don't know that, you're extremely ignorant of your own religion. Everyone knows that the Catholic religion has a ton of things that aren't in the Bible. The Protestants say that you do not have the authority to do that, and Catholics say they do. And that authority comes from this one verse, which is clearly twisted out of context. It disproves their entire religion. And Jesus hates false religion. God hates false religion. It's the thing that he hates the most. The Jews were constantly chastised for mixing their true religion with the false pagan religion of their neighbors. And ultimately, they were exiled for it. And that's what Catholicism is. It's a mixture of pagan religion with the true Christianity. It kind of looks like Christianity, but it isn't. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing, which is why the first of the two antichrists is the Pope. It's not because this particular Pope is a particularly bad Pope. All popes have been lowercase a antichrists throughout all of history. The office of the papacy is in itself blasphemy. Okay, enough of that, though. Now, this, as I mentioned, this Manhattan blackout connected to the 9 million people blackout, the New York City blackout, exactly 42 years prior. And it was exactly 110 minutes shy of 42 years. And God pairs 9 and 110 together in his signs to confirm his signs and connections. So that's why we have this anniversary of the New York City blackout that is 110 minutes shy, pair with this 9 months. Now, in a second, I'll play a brief clip that explains the amazing reason why God pairs 9 and 110. But before I do that, I'll just say that this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 110. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs from morning until night for more than full-time hours for 7 years. And so I'm just going to play a clip explaining this more, and then I'll be right back. Jesus' official arrival into Jerusalem and first coming was on the 10th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. This is 110, and this hints at the number 110. In the book of Joshua, the date on which the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan River and officially entered the Promised Land was also on the 10th day of the first month, which is 110 and hints at the number 110. Jesus' first coming is symbolized by the number 110. This is why on 9/11, the two towers that collapsed were each 110 stories high. The collapse of two towers that were 110 floors was symbolism for Jesus' second coming. In the book of Joshua in the Bible, Joshua died at the age of 110. Joshua led the Hebrews around the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in judgment. On 9/11, the Twin Towers, which were 110 stories high, collapsed, engendering a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, on Wall Street. President George Washington was a founding father, and his inauguration as the first president was a symbolic founding of the nation. The cracking of the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street on 9/11 symbolized America's foundation in God being cracked. This is because after Washington's inauguration at Federal Hall, he then walked down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its blessings. After 9/11, Trinity Chapel was called the Miracle Chapel, as it was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived. It did not even suffer a broken window due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted as it sheltered the chapel from the falling debris. In commemoration of this sycamore tree outside the chapel, today there is a huge bronze statue of its roots. In other words, through the 9/11 events, God was pointing to Trinity Chapel and Washington's covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. Wall Street is named after the original 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. The collapse of 110 floors that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which is named after a 9-foot-high security wall, hints at 9/11 and points to Joshua, who died at 110, and the Hebrews that marched around the walls of security before they collapsed in judgment. 110 floors and the 9-foot-high wall of security that was Wall Street points to George Washington's march down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel that symbolized a covenantal relationship between America and God. To this effect, Washington's march down Wall Street with the New York Stock Exchange, the building that symbolizes America's financial strength, located on one side of the street, and Federal Hall, the building that symbolizes America's governmental and institutional strength on the other side, also pointed to the cutting rights ritual practiced in ancient Israel that was used in Abraham's and God's ritual walk in their covenant that is described in Genesis 15. A covenant that symbolizes Washington's walk down Wall Street and his covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded not on ethnicity or territory or language, but were founded solely for God, Israel and America. In every daily Bible that is divided into 365 readings, a portion of the Bible for each day of the year, on every September 11th, everyone that reads this standard 365-day Bible reads the passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 11, which is the judgment warning on ancient Israel, which was a raid on ancient Israel by the world's first recorded terrorists, the ancient Assyrians. And the terrorists on 9/11 were from the same part of the world. The Assyrians raided the northern kingdom of Israel first, and then later the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, which is why the terrorists on 9/11 hit the North Tower first, followed 17 minutes later by the South Tower. And this Isaiah 9:11 passage includes a mention of collapsed buildings and uprooted sycamore trees. On the morning after 9/11, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle gave a speech to the world regarding the events on 9/11. He quoted the passage in Isaiah 9:11, not realizing it was a judgment warning on the ancient Jews. He quoted how, after the raid by the Assyrians, the Hebrews did not repent to God, but instead vowed defiantly to rebuild and become stronger than before. And so, like the ancient Jews, America did not repent after the judgment warning, and instead defied God even more. And so, like ancient Israel, America will now be destroyed. This is why, in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, he frequently pairs together the number 110 and the number 9. Both of these numbers symbolize God's judgment on the nation, and paired together, these numbers point to the big judgment warning that was 9/11. As well, these numbers paired together in God's signs and connections serve as a witness confirmation that the perceived signs and connections are from God. After the judgment warning of 9/11, America was given a period of grace to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment destruction. In the Bible, a 20-year period symbolizes a complete period of waiting. Jacob waited 20 years to get possession of his wives and property. The children of Israel waited 20 years to be freed of Jabin, the king of Canaan, when they were freed from bondage by Deborah and Barak. The Ark of the Covenant waited 20 years in Kiriath-Jearim, and Solomon spent 20 years building his home and the house of God. On the 20th anniversary of the buildings that collapsed on 9/11 was the sudden collapse of America's presence in Afghanistan, and the iconic scene of this was the U.S. Air Force plane leaving the airport in Afghanistan, and the big number on the side of its plane is 1109, which hints at 110 and 9. Okay, now, God not only pairs 9 with 110, but he also pairs 9 with 23. Oh, you know what? And this was inevitable, because I've not got a script and I'm just going off. I forgot to explain the duck boat tragedy and how it pointed to the 153 number. I'll just say it quickly. I'm sorry. I apologize. So Table Rock Lake has a maximum depth of 220 feet. And again, 220 symbolizes rock, as I just explained, because Peter is symbolized by rooster and Peter means rock. Now, that's why Table Rock Lake has a maximum depth of 220 feet. The duck boat tragedy occurred, the duck boat was raised, so the duck boat sank right before sunset, or was it right after? Okay, and it was raised from the watery grave exactly 3.5 days earlier, in the early morning, which was, of course, symbolism for the 3.5 days that Jesus was in the grave. But the day in the early morning, that the duck boat was raised was the same early morning on the 9th of Av in the Hebrew calendar, which is the date that commemorates the day that the walls and the temples were destroyed by the Babylonians and Romans. On this 9th of Av date that's about the temple and the Temple Mount and the walls, a 220-pound rock fell from the western wall. Now, this day is a day when there's an exceptionally large number of Jews praying at the wall, but fortunately it occurred early in the morning and in the Gentile worship area of the wall, so it didn't kill anyone. But anyway, so you have the 220-pound rock that fell from the wall on the same early morning that the duck boat was raised from the 220-foot-deep Table Rock Lake. Now, the rock that fell from the wall smashed the steps of the Gentile worship area. That was symbolism for the rock, the giant rock in Daniel chapter 2, the very foundational prophecy regarding the coming of the Messiah, symbolized by the rock, smashing the feet of the statue, which is symbolic of the times of the Gentiles, which is why the rock smashed the steps, as in feet, of the Gentile worship area. Okay? All right. Now, that same day, the day that the duck boat sank was the day that the Knesset in Israel passed the Jewish nation law, the controversial Jewish nation law. And so it's just more Israel symbolism. I'm not going to put in my 2 cents regarding the controversy. But also the tragedy resulted in 17 people drowning, 9 of which were from the same family. 9 times 7, that's a huge coincidence designed by God. 9 people from the same family? Are you kidding me? 9 from the same family, okay, 17 deaths. 9 times 17 is equal to 153. Now, why is that especially relevant here? Well, Table Rock Lake has almost the exact same water surface area and almost exactly the same, in other words, basically the same water volume. The same water volume and the same surface area as the Sea of Galilee, the lake in northern Israel, on which the disciples in Jesus' last miracle caught 153 fish, which confirms the whole everything, including the 3.5 days to the resurrection of the boat. Today, by the way, that boat in which they caught the fish is in the museum on the north side of the lake. I know it. I know it spiritually. I mean, there's no sign on the boat that says this was the boat of the disciples and Jesus and the 153 fish, but I know it is. And the reason for that is because it'll be a testament in the 1,000 years of peace in the Messianic age. People from around the world will come and visit Jerusalem and Israel, and they'll go and visit that boat to see the boat that the disciples caught the 153 fish in. That miracle, incidentally, is symbolic of the end of the age of fishing for men, which is why the duck boat tragedy is one of these signs, one of these symbolic beginnings of the sevens, if you will, in the summer of 2018, the second coming. But 220, speaking of the Manhattan blackout, which points to 9/11, because of one of the signs, the musical Broadway Come From Away is about 9/11, and they were one of the 2 musicals that put on an impromptu street performance. Anyway, during the blackout. And the towers that collapsed were 110 stories each. Well, I just explained that in the clip, actually. Yeah. And that gives us 220 floors in total, which hints at the number 220, which symbolizes rock, as I just explained. And also it symbolizes the second coming, because the date 110 symbolizes the first coming, and so the second coming is symbolized, if you will, by date 110s. In other words, 220. Okay, so it's time to move on, though. The other thing that, the other number one of the other numbers, I should say, that God pairs with 9 is 23. And let me just play a brief clip that explains why, and this is relevant too, not only because of this 9 months connection, but this 9 plus 9 plus 9 months connection. And God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. Okay, and the number 9 is the most important number in God's big picture of signs. It's from the Bible. It symbolizes God's judgment. So we have these 2 pairings of 9s here. And also, by the way, it again connects to the 9 million blackout in 1977, a pairing with this 23 months connection. But let me just play a clip, and I'll be right back. I'll explain. It's amazing why God pairs 9 and 23 together. God uses the number 23 to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. In the Old Testament in the Bible, it is described how 2 goats were used on the Day of Atonement in the ritual on the Temple Mount. In Bible prophecy, there are 2 antichrists, and in Bible prophecy, it is said that the Antichrist will rule the Temple Mount during the end times period. And the Antichrist will be vanquished from the Temple Mount at the return of Lord Jesus Christ on the Day of Atonement in 2024. Goat is Antichrist symbolism. Goat stands for greatest of all time. And this is why the 2 goats of basketball wore jersey number 23, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. The GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, played for Chicago, and the GOAT Antichrist, the basketball president, is from Chicago. LeBron James is famous for being from Cleveland and having played for Cleveland and having won the NBA Finals championship for Cleveland, breaking the supposed Cleveland sports curse, which is Antichrist King symbolism, which is why LeBron James goes by the nickname King James. And this was used to point to the president Grover Cleveland, who was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, skipping the 23rd presidency, just like the Antichrist will serve non-consecutive terms, having skipped the 45th presidency. In God's true big picture of end times signs, patterns, and connections, the number 9 is the most important number, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number, and the number 45 is the 9th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 9th row is 45. This is why Michael Jordan, in the exact middle of his career, after having won 3 NBA titles and before winning his other 3 NBA titles, retired briefly, and when he returned, wore jersey number 45 for coincidentally 23 games. And it is why Michael Jordan, in his last game as a Chicago Bull, another city God uses to point to the Antichrist, who is also from Chicago, scored 45 points against the team from the 45th state. Like Michael Jordan, LeBron James also played in Cleveland, then famously left Cleveland in much controversy, and then returned again to play a second time in Cleveland in order to win the championship for Cleveland and break the Cleveland sports curse, which symbolizes the Antichrist curse of Barack Obama when he will return to the White House for his second presidency. In other words, the hiatus in the middle of Michael Jordan's career in Chicago and the hiatus in the middle of LeBron James's career in Cleveland hint at the hiatus of Barack Obama skipping the 45th presidency and returning to the White House for a second presidency. It will be his third term, which is why Michael Jordan won 3 championships and then briefly retired before returning a second time to win 3 more championships. God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together in order to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school and became president in 2009, and will become the president again in 2023. From the Bible, the numbers 9 and 23 both symbolize judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number. The only grandfather-grandson presidents were the 9th and 23rd presidents, William and Benjamin Harrison. The 9th president, William Harrison, died on the calendar date April 4th, 44, which hints at the 44th president. Harrison died exactly 1 month after his inauguration. The name Harrison hints at Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike and lightning and turbulence in St. Louis. And the Antichrist Barack Obama will rise to power and become president again through her replacement, which is what is hinted at with the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, President Grover Cleveland, who skipped the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. The 23rd president, which is why LeBron James, who played for Cleveland, wore jersey number 23. Michelle Obama will first replace Kamala Harris, and then Barack will replace Michelle. Michelle is the feminine version of Michael, which is the reason for the name Michael in the name Michael Jordan. In the Bible, the Hebrews crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Barack Obama's famous autobiography is named A Promised Land. Obama the Antichrist will promise the world a new world order utopia. A goat is Antichrist symbolism. The greatest of all time, the GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, wore jersey number 23 and jersey number 9 when he played for the U.S. Olympic Dream Team, a team that beat their opponents by an average of 44 points per game, which hints at the 44th president, GOAT, Antichrist, that wore jersey number 23 and became president in 2009. If you have not already watched the Michael Jordan prophecy video on this channel, the Michael Jordan prophecy video is an essential video for foundational understanding of how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. Besides revealing the identity of the Antichrist, God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 to reveal what the mark of the Antichrist is. Bible prophecy describes a mark of the Antichrist, which if one takes, they will go to hell, and if one doesn't take it, they won't be able to buy or sell, which means they won't be allowed to buy the rationed food that will be rationed due to the coming food shortages. Ezekiel chapter 9 is the chapter that describes the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist. In other words, the 9th chapter of the book of Ezekiel in the Bible is about the mark of the Antichrist, and the mark of the Antichrist involves changing one's chromosomes. And we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. God pairs 9 and 23 to identify what the mark of the Antichrist is. And speaking of the GOAT of basketball, LeBron James, who wears jersey number 23, he gave his name, LeBron James, to a Nike shoe that is named 23 chromosomes. The pattern on the shoe is unmistakably a pattern that resembles snakeskin, and that is because the mark of the Antichrist is a snake bite. The mark of the Antichrist changes chromosomes through inserting a protruding shaped amino acid chain, and this protruding shaped amino acid chain is synthesized snake poison. In the Bible, the biggest symbol of evil, of Satan, is the serpent. The reason why the shoe is made by Nike and why Michael Jordan is known for his Air Jordan shoe made by Nike is that Nike hints at the Nicolaitan doctrine that the vast majority of Christians have, especially evangelical Christians. This Nicolaitan doctrine of our day that Jesus said he hates in Revelation chapter 2, and that he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. This explains why many quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist. It is judgment for their doctrine. That said, nowhere in the Bible does it say that one cannot repent after taking the mark of the Antichrist. To learn more about what the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day is, watch the most important video titled 23 Church Signs video. Alright, so 9 months after the Manhattan blackout was the rainbow over Manhattan. Now, also, this is interesting because 9 months is symbolic of the period of human gestation. And Jesus used the metaphor when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, birth pains. And the Manhattan rainbow on April 13th, 2020 occurred in context of these connections that were 50-year connections back to the first legalization of abortions, which involved New York State, which is why the greatest number of deaths from the CVD disease was in New York City. It was designed by God. It's judgment. And that's why we have this 9 months connection as well, from the Manhattan blackout to the Manhattan rainbow. In the Bible, in chapter 9 of Genesis, God's sign regarding judgment and his covenant with man regarding judgment is the rainbow. On April 13th, the mainstream media, in fact, it was like the top story on the Drudge page, for example, April 13th, 2020, which, by the way, was 1 month after March 13th, when Trump declared a national emergency over the CVD disease. March 13th, 2020 was exactly 50 years after abortions were legalized in the first state. And so, incidentally, if you put back 1 month, March 13th, 2020, we get the day of trumpets, because Trump is God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs. We have trumpeting the national emergency, which is, of course, symbolic of the destruction of America and the national emergency, the coming of the Antichrist, which incidentally is why March 13th, 2020 was exactly 50 years after the first state legalized abortions, which was Hawaii, the Rainbow State. That's the slogan on the license plates of Hawaii, the Rainbow State. I used to live there. There's a lot of rainbows. And that's why we have the connection here also to this rainbow here, and also another 50-year anniversary. It was the 50-year anniversary of the Apollo 13 disaster. But I'm jumping ahead. Let me just finish this. The reason why 50 years is because of Leviticus chapter 25. It's extremely prophetic, this restitution, or rather restoration of God's people to their original land and clan. But it's also about restitution. And that's why God has used this 50 years connection, these 50 years connections here, as symbolizing restitution, in other words, judgment for the over 50 million abortions. Now, back to what I was saying, though, about April 13th. The rainbow over Manhattan was one of the top stories of the day because it occurred, for one thing, during the CVD LOCKDOWN, the imprisonment of people during the CVD disease. And I mean, in their homes, it was still an imprisonment. And that was why the secular world interpreted the rainbow as a possible supposed ray of hope from God or something, that, we're going to get through this, or something to that effect. You could easily see how the deluded would think such a thing. But in fact, little did they realize it was massive judgment from God. Because again, the rainbow is God's sign that symbolizes this. So the rainbow, the reason why it was the story too, is because from the view of from across the Hudson River, from where you would have the view of the 9/11 attacks, the iconic view, the rainbow stretched perfectly between the two iconic towers. So the photo that went viral, the rainbow stretches perfectly between the Empire State Building and the One World Tower, which replaced the Twin Towers. So God was, in other words, pointing to 9/11, the big warning of judgment, with this rainbow between the two iconic towers. Let me just put up a picture. I should do that. I'll post a picture here in the video. I'll be right back. All right, you can see here the rainbow from the Empire State Building to the One World Tower. There's even close-up shots that I've got, but you get the idea, okay? So that's that prophetic rainbow on April 13th, 2020. Now I'll explain now more why this is an important sign on this particular date. And that is because of Apollo 13. This mission to the moon. Now, the moon is symbolic of Christ. It's a giant rock. And in the Bible, the rock is symbolism for Jesus. But also, the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. This is why watching for the timing of the moon in the Bible is symbolic of watching for the timing of the Lord and his return through moon signs, for example. This being one of them, because of the Apollo 13 mission to the moon. Now, the Apollo 13 mission launched, it launched at the 13th, 1 p.m., the 13th hour of the day, I think maybe even 13 minutes after after 1 p.m. Whoa, if that's the case, that would hint at January 13th. Wait a second, let me just check that. All right, it launched right on schedule, which was 2:13 p.m. And so that, it was the 13th minute of that hour. And also, the disaster occurred on the 13th. So Apollo 13 launched on the 13th minute of the hour, and the disaster occurred on the 13th, April 13th, and it is Apollo 13. That's a bunch of 13s. Before I go there, the time of the launch at 2:13 is extremely prophetic. It points to Ezra chapter 2, verse 13, which the chapter is about the return of the exiles from Babylon to Jerusalem to rebuild the house of God. And it follows chapter 1 regarding the decree by King Cyrus to allow the Jews to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the house of God. Trump is a type for King Cyrus and vice versa. Trump, the 45th president, is a type for Cyrus described in Isaiah chapter 45. In Ezra chapter 1, it's about the decree that Cyrus made. And the description of King Cyrus in chapter 45 is that King Cyrus is God's instrument, without Cyrus even knowing, and without other people recognizing him as being a man of God. Likewise it is with Trump. Now, Cyrus made this decree exactly 70 years after the captivity began, which was prophesied by Jeremiah beforehand. And Trump declared with a decree, a written paper, document, a decree, that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel and that the house of the U.S. Embassy be rebuilt in Jerusalem exactly 70 years after the UN first recognized Israel as a state, in the 70 years exactly in the Hebrew calendar. Now, so the reason why I go into that is because Trump is predicted to die on the date 2/13, February 13th, which is why the launch of Apollo 13 was at 2:13 p.m. Okay? And the reason for Ezra 2:13 specifically is that is the verse regarding the number of men in the tribe of Adonikam returning, which is 666, which is the number of the Antichrist in Book of Revelation that is associated with a name. So it's symbolism. Not that some people have actually think that the name of the Antichrist will therefore be Adonikam, but no, it's only symbolism. And but anyway, that's why Ezra 2:13. So Apollo 13 launched at 2:13 p.m. Now the number 13 in the Bible is symbolic of the Antichrist, which is why Apollo 13, 13 minutes after the hour, and the disaster on the 13th. Okay, and so for example, Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Adam. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 13th days of the month. And the two Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. Also, the number 13 symbolizes America. founded on 13 colonies. Because America is the 13th tribe of Israel. That requires explanation, I realize, but it is, symbolically. Because the tribe of Joseph was divided into two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, and that gives us 13. But Manasseh was the younger one of the two brothers, but God demonstrated that he would be the one that would receive the inheritance. This is symbolism for how America, the younger sibling of the UK and the Anglosphere nations, was the one that became dominant and received the inheritance. And what I mean by inheritance is that the Anglosphere nations were chosen by God. As Abraham Lincoln said, America is an almost chosen people. Okay, so and anyway, I'm not going to get into that. Some people ask me, though, why are you always focused on signs in America? And the answer is because God is. Because you don't understand what's going on to even ask that question. You're not recognizing history and God's hand on history, etc. Okay? God chose America as his instrument to spread the gospel around the world, for one thing. And also the British Empire, for example, which at one point in history, the sun never set on. And so, contrary to the leftists and communists, the British Empire wasn't evil, but it served to cross-pollinate the different cultures of the world, and in doing so, spread the gospel. But America took that further in the 19th and 20th centuries. And anyway, back to what I was saying, though, the moon missions are ultimately for the purpose of pointing to how America has departed from Christ, because the moon symbolizes Christ. That's why we have this prophetic Apollo 13 disaster, because of these missions to the moon, which are symbolism for how America has departed from Christ, because the moon symbolizes Christ. Okay? Apollo 17 was the last time that an American stepped on foot of the moon. Apollo 17. That's why the two planes struck the two towers 17 minutes apart. That's why the two shuttle disasters, the NASA missions, the shuttle disasters, were almost exactly 17 years apart. In fact, the dates of the two disasters are so close together, just like 2 or 3 days apart, that they are commemorated every year on the same date. They were 17 years apart, and the two planes that struck the two towers on 9/11 were 17 minutes apart, because God is pointing to Apollo 17, the last time an American stepped foot on the moon, the last time an American departed the moon, which is symbolism for America's departure from Christ. That date was December 14th, 1972, exactly 12 times 12,000 days. No, not 12, sorry. 12 times 12 weeks, 144 weeks exactly. Which, by the way, hints from prophecy as America being the 13th tribe, because the 12 times 12 comes from the revelation about the 12 tribes of Israel. But anyway, it was 12 times 12 weeks exactly after the first state legalized abortions, like I just talked about it a minute ago, March 13th, 1970, and the 50 years to Trump on March 13th, 2020. By the way, that date, March 13th, 2020, gives us 37 months exactly to this date, which then in turn is 7 plus 7 plus 7. 37 hints at 3 sets of 7. So why don't I just play a clip here it's very brief, it's really amazing, explaining the prophetic significance between 3 sets of 7 and Trump. All right? But again, it's 37 months here to this, and then 7 plus 7, in other words, another 3 sets of 7, to the predicted date of the Big event that will cause Trump to not become the president. President Trump is God's trumpet that he uses to highlight and confirm his signs. The word trump in archaic English means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. Donald Trump was born on a Sabbath day, and the portion of Torah that was read in synagogues on the day that Trump was born was the passage from the book of Numbers, in which God commanded the making of trumpets. Trump was born exactly 23 months, which happens to be exactly 700 days, before Israel was reborn. And God used Trump in prophetic signs regarding the restoration of Israel. Donald Trump chose his running mate, Mike Pence, and their two names, Trump-Pence, hints at trumpets. Trump's presidency, including his election campaign, was synonymous with his border wall of security. Before the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment on ancient Jericho, the Hebrews blew trumpets. Before the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment on the ancient city of Jericho, the Hebrews marched around Jericho's walls of security 7 times over 7 days, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. This was a 3 sets of 7. In the book of Revelation, which describes God's judgment in the end times period, there are also 3 sets of 7 judgments. When the Hebrews blew the trumpets at Jericho, it was an announcement from God of judgment on the city of Jericho. Likewise, President Trump's presidency was an announcement of judgment on the nation of America, God's Gentile nation and the only other nation in history besides Israel that was founded on a relationship with God. This is why President Trump's election campaign and presidency were synonymous with his border wall of security, and why on the first day of his presidency, on Inauguration Day, President Trump was exactly 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old, which was 3 sets of 7, and paralleled the 3 sets of 7 in the book of Joshua. Through the symbolic very beginning of Trump's presidency, God announced judgment on the nation. Joshua, the leader of the Hebrews, led them around the walls of security 7 times over 7 days, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. On the day that President Trump was elected by 77 electoral votes, the leader of Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, had been in power for exactly 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days. So back to what I was saying about Apollo 13 and this being symbolism for America's departure from Christ, which is why it is Apollo 13, because 13 symbolizes America, the 13th tribe of Israel. And by the way, that's why 13 colonies, because the promised land was divided among the tribes, and America was founded in a similar way, with these different areas making up one nation, the 13 colonies. That's symbolism for the 13 tribes taking the plots of their land in the promised land, right? So, because it was 13 tribes, okay? Right, well, anyway, so the point is, though, whether you disagree or agree with me on that finer point, the number 13 symbolizes America. Now, and it's not a finer point, it is a big deal, but that's another story. Okay, now, the Apollo 13 disaster, let's say this first. The reason why this is relevant to the Manhattan Rainbow is because the Manhattan Rainbow occurred, like I said, during the CVD lockdown. That was the big thing about it. The big thing about the rainbow and why it was a viral story is because of the secular, deluded world thinking that it is a sign of hope when it was the opposite. Because their world is upside down and everything is the opposite. It's morally upside down, everything about the left. Okay? And so the thing is, this is how it connects. The Apollo 13, as it was said, and by the way, on the 50th anniversary, they released, I think it was NASA that released, it must have been, officially, like a NASA video that was 9 minutes long about the mission, which is another confirmation of the 9 months connection here and all that. And the number 9, again, is the most important number as from the Bible. It symbolizes God's judgment. And again, the number 9 pairs with this 23 months right here. Now, but in the video, and this is part of the Apollo 13 story, it doesn't need to be in this particular video, but it was said that the Apollo 13 mission was plagued from the beginning. Because right before the launch, one of the crew members came down with the rubella virus. That's right, the virus. He came down with the virus right before the mission, and he had to be replaced. The mission was plagued from the beginning. That's why this occurred with this rainbow in Manhattan, the epicenter of the plague, on the 50th anniversary. You get the idea here, okay? That's how the Apollo 13 connects. But it not only connects that way, there's another second witness to this connection too. The Apollo 13 disaster was about an explosion. And that's why this fits into this big picture of signs in this diagram. Because what is the Manhattan rainbow? Okay, yes, the explosion is predicted to happen in Manhattan. Yes, that's true. That's enough, really. But this Manhattan rainbow connects to Apollo 13, which was about an explosion. There was an explosion on board that cut off, or was a result of the oxygen supply, which made it that they were running out of oxygen. It was like a dramatic thing. In fact, you've heard the phrase, Houston, we have a problem. That comes from Apollo 13. After this explosion, Houston, we have a problem. There was a major movie made about it with Tom Hanks and Kevin Bacon, etc. So, Houston, we have a problem occurred after the explosion. One of the most famous lines in American, one of the most well-known phrases in the American language, Houston, we have a problem, is about an explosion. And God pointed to it through this, like I am explaining, with this prophetic sign. And ultimately, it's pointing to the explosion that's predicted for January 13th, when America will say, Houston, we have a problem. It looks like the President Trump is going to be the president, and there's martial law and, like I'm saying, the beginning of the chaos. Houston, we have a problem, okay? This major disaster in American history, you know what I mean, like significant culturally, this Apollo 13 disaster, this extremely symbolic event, God is using to communicate the destruction of America. And again, like I'm saying, it's because it all points to the departure from the moon. And I forgot to mention some other things there. The departure from the moon wasn't only exactly 12 times 12 weeks after the first legalization of abortions in Hawaii, the Rainbow State. But that day was exactly 40 years before what the Rainbow President said, and he is the Rainbow President because not only is he homosexual, but also he lit up the White House in rainbow colors when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of gay marriage. So he is the Rainbow President. And he said that his worst day in office was the Sandy Hook shootings on December 14th, 2012, which was exactly 40 years after the departure from the moon. Now, here is the thing. 40 years is extremely prophetic in the Bible. It symbolizes judgment. The Israelites in the desert were judged for not trusting in God for 40 years. And after the 40 years, they were allowed to enter the promised land, which, by the way, is America. The Pilgrims saw America, the New World, as their promised land, and their crossing of the Atlantic is analogous to the Israelites crossing the Jordan River into the promised land. So that's the significance of 40 years. But also, mass school shootings have been judgment signs from God for the murder of unborn babies. That's correct. When did the mass school shootings begin? They really began with the big one, the Columbine shooting. When was Columbine? It was exactly at the peak of baby boomers' kids in high school. What happened after Columbine? The mass school shootings moved into universities, when the peak of the baby boomers' kids were in university. The millennials, right? The peak of it, that generation. Because abortions were legalized for the baby boomer generation. Right? You had this mass bulk of people starting to be of reproductive age, and they didn't want anything to do with it. I mean, they wanted their freedom. It was the adult lifestyle of choice season of cultural history, the 60s and 70s, right? Which led to the neglectful parenting of this generation for the nomad generation, the Generation X, and on and on. I've studied this, like it's a really interesting subject, but I don't want to get off too much more. So the point is, though, is that abortions were legalized for baby boomers. That generation needed to do their own thing and not be restricted that way. And it needed to have the sexual revolution, furthermore. And so they needed to have abortions. Right? And so mass school shootings are judgment for this, on their kids, for their condoning the murder of other people's unborn babies. That's why these parents' kids were murdered in schools. Now, also, the 576th word in Strong's Greek Concordance, I think it's the Greek Concordance, is to step off, to disembark. In other words, the last American to step off, disembark, the moon. That's why exactly 576 months after the last American stepped off of the moon was the day that the first American took the thing, the mark of the Antichrist, on December 14th, 2020. Exactly 4 + 4 years after the 44th president's worst day in office. The 44th president Antichrist, who will enforce the mark of the Antichrist, the thing. Furthermore, things that come out of guns and go into people, bullets, are symbolism for things that come out of things and go into people. Also, this 576 months is exactly 48 years. And Barack Obama is predicted to become the 48th president after this predicted bomb in New York City. Now, here is how the Apollo 13 also ties into this rainbow, because not only was it plagued from the beginning, the mission, but in the solution to the crisis in space, the crew decided to hop into the lunar module and get back to Earth and use the oxygen in the lunar module. And that saved the day. The lunar module is more moon symbolism. It's more Christ symbolism, as in Christ being the Savior. In other words, the crew repented, they turned around, which is what repentance means. It's symbolized by turning 180 degrees and reversing course. In other words, it's a sign from God, reverse course, America, which is symbolized by the number 13. You're about to be destroyed. Reverse course, the crew turned around 180 degrees, hopped in the lunar module, which is symbolic of Christ, which is the vehicle through which we can be saved when we repent and turn around. Christ is the Savior. The moon symbolizes Christ. America departed from Christ, and God communicated this through Apollo 13. After an explosion. The lunar module in the media at the time was said to be the astronauts' lifeboat, which is symbolic of the ark, which is Noah's flood symbolism, as is the rainbow, which is how this Apollo 13 connects to this extremely significant prophetic rainbow over Manhattan during the peak of the CVD LOCKDOWN imprisonment. Furthermore, now I've just explained these two boats. We have this lifeboat sign, the Apollo 13, in conjunction with the rainbow, which makes it an Apollo 13 sign, as I've now established and explained. It connects with the gestation period 9 months to the explosion of the boat on Table Rock Lake, which is at the explosion after which the astronauts jumped into the lifeboat, which is symbolic of Christ. Because, of course, the ark is symbolic of Christ in the account of the flood as well. The only way to salvation, to be saved, is through Christ's payment for the ransom that is owed to the ruler of this world. It is through Christ's conquering of death that we can also conquer death, which is the payment or wages of sin. Sin leads to death. There is no way around it. It is through sin that one is in bondage to Satan as a slave. Satan has the title to the deed. It needed to be overcome. Death needed to be overcome. But it had to be done by a man. But it couldn't be done by a man. So God became a man and overcame death and paid the ransom owed. One is free to follow Jesus. The payment has been made. If they choose to, they can follow Jesus and so be saved. It is their choice. Now, I've explained 23 and 9, the basketball president, War 23, inaugurated in 09. Okay. So 23 months after the Manhattan Rainbow and Apollo 13, we get to this date here, which is at 23. Because 3 divided by 13 is equal to 0.0230. In other words, God has embedded in this date the identity of the Antichrist. Now, 2 divided by 3 is 0.666. Okay, so the first legalization of abortions on March 13th, 1970, was in the Antichrist state, okay, where he wore number 23 in high school basketball. So March 13th, 3 divided by 13, 0.230. 42 months is symbolic of the period of the Antichrist, mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy, and that's why this state here is exactly 42 years after the state legalized abortions. Now, the irony, too, is that had abortions been legalized in Hawaii in 1961, Barack Obama wouldn't have been born. That's the extreme irony. It's irony only that could only have been designed by God. Because the truth is, Obama's mother was seduced by Frank Marshall Davis, and they would have had an abortion. The reason for a Barack Obama Sr. is that Barack Obama Sr. had been brought over from Kenya as a student in a CIA program to fight communism in Kenya, exposing the elites in Kenya to the American way. And so Barack Obama's grandfather was a CIA undercover, and he was assigned to Hawaii to monitor the communist movement in Hawaii, which was led by Frank Marshall Davis. And God used, by the way, the name Frank Marshall Davis to hint at the coming martial law that will be the result of this predicted bomb. So this is how Obama's 18-year-old mother crossed paths with Frank Marshall Davis and got knocked up, because Frank Marshall Davis seduced her, because Frank Marshall Davis is a communist, and communists are not people with integrity. They're evil. Communism is evil, and so is the spirit of a communist. But anyway, so Frank Marshall Davis knocked up the daughter of the CIA agent, and he, Obama's grandfather, feared for losing his job if the knowledge of this had reached the CIA. So he arranged it that this farce would be played out where Barack Obama Sr. would pretend to be the father of Barack Obama. And Barack Obama Sr. went along with it because he as a result, was able to stay in America and finish his doctorate, which he wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And that's, for example, why, and it is known, this isn't a conspiracy or some sort of fact that isn't out there, Barack Obama's mother and Barack Obama Sr. never spent any time together. The excuse in the media is that, well, he was busy doing his doctorate and they never had time. But that's not the truth. But to make the whole thing look real to immigration, they decided to go over to Kenya and have the baby, which makes a lot of sense. It was actually a brilliant move that they would do something like that. That really makes it believable. And anyway, long story short, you can learn all about this more in the must-watch Dreams from My Real Father documentary. But the thing that documentary misses is what I just said. Barack Obama was indeed born in Kenya. So the reason why that documentary, and it's designed by God too, because God doesn't want the 100% entire truth in one video. You have to be seeking the truth, but also God wants it to not really be obvious everywhere. You have to know these things, right? So there's all this conflicting information, which is why some people turn off the theory that Frank Marshall Davis is the real father, but he is. The missing piece of the puzzle is what I'm saying, and I came to this because of my own experience in my former life when I was a Canadian wanting to be an American. In Hawaii, furthermore. It was designed by God, actually, that this all came to me. But it's so true. That's exactly what would have happened and what did happen. Because there's all sorts of evidence, of course, that Barack Obama was born in Kenya. But the thing is that Frank Marshall Davis is the real father. Okay. So back to what I was saying. What was I saying? Oh, we were talking about this 42nd anniversary here. Now, which is pointed to with exactly 23 months, and Barack Obama wore 23 in Hawaii, the Rainbow State. Now, what happened on this day was all about the number 23. Because on this day, Tom Brady announced that he would return, announced in a tweet that he would return for a 23rd season. And he was 44 years old at the time. And God pairs 23 and 44 to confirm the signs and connections. I explained earlier how, God pairs numbers to confirm signs and connections, as I mentioned. And I also explained 23 and 9, but also 23 and 44, because the 44th president was the basketball president who wore 23. Okay, so the date itself, again, hints at 23. Tom Brady announced he would return, the GOAT of football, I should say, the greatest of all time, GOAT, as in GOAT Antichrist symbolism, announced he would return for a 23rd season. And this was on the same day that Obama announced that he had the CVD disease, which changed, and that he was glad to have taken the mark of the Antichrist, which changes a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes. And he announced this in a tweet, like Tom Brady did. The GOAT Antichrist announced this in a tweet. And this was announced 23 days before he returned to the White House for the first time since having left office. And he returned to celebrate nationalized health care, which obviously also hints at the enforcement of the mark of the Antichrist through health products, so-called. Not only that, though, this date was also exactly 23 weeks after what the media or the NFL also sold as being the return of the GOAT football game, which is when Tom Brady and the Buccaneers came to Boston, his former place of his former team, former city, and he returned to play the Patriots. So it was a return of the GOAT football game. It actually was the highest rated regular season game that year. And it was a big deal. The return of the GOAT game was exactly 23 weeks before Tom Brady announced he would return for a 23rd season, on the day that Obama announced that he was glad to have taken the thing that changes a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes, 23 days before he returned to the White House. Oh, and by the way, he announced that he was glad to have taken the thing that changes 23 pairs of chromosomes because he announced also that he at this time had the CVD disease. But of course, the line being that, well, it wasn't as bad as what it was otherwise would have been. I'm glad I took the thing, so whatever, right? And so, yes, that's amazing beyond words. Now, the explosion signs on the date, which was expected in advance, we knew that this date would be an explosion date in advance, was the 12 explosions outside the U.S. consulate, and Tom Brady wears number 12. Also on this day, the explosions at the Polish-Ukraine border, just on the other side, on the Ukraine side, where U.S. soldiers were training Ukrainians. Russia launched bombs on that ground, and which was warned ahead of time that they would, and so that's as close as you get to an explosion to America, because NATO is America. Unfortunately, NATO is evil. It's another story, though, that I've explained in another recent video. Okay, because it's socialism, and also military alliances were condemned by God. The Jews were judged for this in the Old Testament. Yeah. And by this form of socialism, the immature citizens, like in socialism, in this case being the countries that don't fund their own defense because of their reliance on NATO. But NATO is all happy to do it because it keeps them having a job and an organization and keeps America on top and all that. It's all corruption, and it's all socialism, which is by nature corrupt. Okay, so back to what I was saying, though. So this is what happened on this date. Now the thing is that this was 40 days exactly after Tom Brady announced his retirement. So, and the media said it. The headlines were 40 days after he announced his retirement, he announces he's returning for a 23rd season. 40 days is extremely prophetic in the Bible, because the floodwaters in the flood account increased for 40 days. And the flood began on the 17th day of the second month, which is incidentally why in Manhattan, the two planes struck the two towers 17 minutes apart, because the flood began on the 17th day of the second month. But we have this 40 days connection that was a part of the story, followed by this exact 2 times 17 months to the predicted explosions in Manhattan, or possibly one explosion. That's amazing. That's amazing, because that's the confirmation for the 40 days, the relevance of the 40 days connection, because they're both Noah's flood symbolism connections. What's also amazing here too, and this was recognized prior to March 13th and the announcement from Tom Brady. This connection here was known ahead of time. I had no idea that Tom Brady would be the sign on March 13th, but what I did know is that God was pointing to this date with this 69 weeks connection. Because exactly 69 weeks earlier was the big announcement, as in Tom Brady and Obama's announcement on this date. Exactly 69 weeks earlier was the announcement that the U.S., I think it was the CIA and the government or the agency in Moldova had broken up a massive scheme to smuggle weapons-grade plutonium, or maybe it was uranium, I forget, out of the nation or through the nation. And that's what we're talking about with the dirty bomb, right? The weapons-grade material for this bomb. 69 weeks, because that's from the most central prophecy in the Bible, a 69-week period that symbolizes the timing of the beginning of the end times and the period of the Antichrist. Okay, so that's why this date was recognized. But when we look back, I also realized after the Tom Brady sign came up, I realized that this date, well, I forget the date, it was also a date of a prophetic football game with Tom Brady in which the score added up to 69, which confirmed the 69 weeks. Amazing, amazing. Now, one thing here, speaking of 7 years, it's in biblical years, prophetic years, 2,520 days, which means a 12-month period of 30 days each. That's why this is symbolic of this. It's exactly 25 times 2 months to the Hawaii false missile alert. Okay, to this Obama sign. Obama is from Hawaii. Okay? All right, we're making some progress here in this diagram now. This 23 months is followed by 13 months. Okay, so this 13 months is relevant because of this. Again, the number 13 is symbolic of America and also the Antichrist. This is the true Antichrist sign, right? We have the goat of football and the goat Antichrist, both announcing on tweets, and then a return in context of the number 23. Furthermore, it's the 44th president, and Tom Brady was 44 years old. We're talking about, okay, you get the idea. And 3 divided by 13 is 0.230. Okay, now this 3 years pairs with the 13 months. And again, that's confirmed with the 3 and 13 date. 3 years is also relevant in terms of 9/11, because 9/11 occurred. In fact, the last building collapsed at the very same minute, exactly 3 years after Bill Clinton repented on television live with a pastor. Okay? That's because in the Bible, King Rahab, whom Clinton is a type for in this parallel, which Jonathan Kahn calls a paradigm, Clinton is a type for King Ahab. And the wife, Queen Jezebel, is what Hillary is a type for. Now, so it was exactly 3 years. After Ahab repented, God gave grace for mercy for 3 years, because he said he would judge and destroy Ahab and the kingdom of Israel. But he waited 3 years after Ahab repented, which is why we have the exact 3 years after Clinton repented to 9/11. As Jonathan Cahn has said, one could have predicted 9/11. Does anyone realize that other things can be predicted, like I'm predicting here in this video? The answer is it is possible. So, like what is about to transpire when this prediction comes to pass. Now, so that's why this 3 years is relevant in context of Manhattan, because again, this sign pointed to 9/11. Again, the rainbow was over the two iconic towers. Now, 36 months, because God uses this connection in the signs frequently, because it hints at the Antichrist. 3 6s, 666. But also 36 is 6 times 6. But also it is 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And also the 36th triangular number is 666. The last number in the 36th row of a triangle of numbers is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. And so you get the idea. Now, but like I said, the trumpets, God's trumpet, trumpeting the national emergency exactly 37 months before the document leaker, that's amazing. But it's also this 36 months connection. So now we get to April 13th, 2023. Okay? This is a very big deal. This date, like I said, I think earlier in the video, I believed that this date was going to be the date of the explosion because God pointed to it overwhelmingly with much more than what is seen in this diagram. Now, we received the prophetic signs that confirmed all of the analysis. Once again, by the way, this date was known ahead of time. This date was known ahead of time. Yes, this date was known ahead of time. I was looking at this time in the stock market. This is really early in the days of watching too, before I, in the prototype, the formative years of understanding how it all works, including trails of signs and steps. But anyway, I do recall looking at September or July 11th, which was a stock market sign, which in the 12th went into the weekend, which was what this date was. Anyway, let's see. These dates were known ahead of time. Yeah. I think the only date that wasn't known ahead of time here was this date. Oh, by the way, the Manhattan blackout pointed to the Manhattan Project. Oh, I didn't finish that. So the Hell's Kitchen area, the blackout was from 42nd Street to 72nd Street in Hell's Kitchen area. And that was on the 42nd anniversary of the New York City blackout. Okay? And also, the initial reported numbers of customers without power was 42,000, and then it was upped to 72,000. Now, 42 is a number that symbolizes the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, as I've mentioned. But 72 is also 66 plus 6, which hints at the Antichrist. But it also is 2 times 6 times 6. And the 266th Pope is the first of the two Antichrists. And again, all of this connects to, well, Hell's Kitchen, but also the Hell's Gate Canyon National Flood on the same day that that killed 7 people, on the same day that the Pope was late for Mass due to a power outage at the Vatican. By 7 minutes he was late, and all that. Okay, that's another story, as I was saying. But I also did explain earlier how God pairs 9 and 23 to point to the president who wore 23 and was inaugurated in 09, who will enforce the mark of the Antichrist, which is alluded to in Ezekiel chapter 9, which changes a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes. That's why the Manhattan blackout, which pointed to a specific localized area, is why I believed it is pointing to a bomb that will target or affect a localized area of the island of Manhattan. Okay, and that's why it was exactly 923 months after the official start date of the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Blackout was officially exactly 923 months after the official start date of the Manhattan Project. That's amazing. God is pointing to the nuclear bomb here, clearly. Another thing, too, about the Manhattan Blackout is that during the Manhattan Blackout was the rare 4.0 magnitude earthquake in Manhattan, Montana, that occurred exactly 9 months and 11 days after the swarm of earthquakes began there, which obviously pointed at the 9/11 events in Manhattan. There's more to that. It's like all of these signs overlap because Manhattan, Montana sits over the plume of Yellowstone volcano in the 44th state, which is predicted to erupt next August, or this August. Anyway, back to the subject of this video, though. So, now 45 months, because it is the ninth triangular number, 45, and also the inverse of 45 is 0.0222. And through the events of 9/11 in Manhattan, God pointed to George Washington, who was born on the date 222. And I already explained in a prior clip in this video how God pointed to George Washington through the events of 9/11. So that's why from the Manhattan Blackout, we have this 222 number. And believe me, I know now from God's signs, after having studied it, I mean, this is true. God embeds the number in the number 45, George Washington, which, by the way, is why President Trump is the 45th president and called into the local Channel 9 news station, I should say, on 9/11, and inadvertently trumpeted that his tower on Wall Street had become the tallest tower in lower Manhattan, and Wall Street was where Washington was inaugurated. So that's more evidence for you that God has embedded in the number 45 George Washington symbolism. It's also symbolism, of course, for the second coming, and also symbolism for the second presidency of the Antichrist, which is why it connects to this Obama Antichrist. No, it doesn't. Sorry, I take the last part back. Okay. So, but what we get here is April 13th, 2023. Let's go through what happened here. So we had this date that was looked at in advance, and we received this sign, which was the climax that had been going on in the news for a number of days prior to this. The mystery identity of who was leaking the classified documents on the internet. The Department of Defense classified documents, right? And it all led eventually to this 21-year-old leaker of the documents arrested in Massachusetts. By the way, the 2x third state to join the Union, which confirms the connection to the announcement of Tom Brady returning for a 23rd season, exactly 23 weeks after the GOAT return football game, on the day that the GOAT Antichrist announced in a tweet he was happy to have taken the thing that changes 23 pairs of chromosomes, and this was 23 days before he returned to the White House. Okay. So, and the point is, too, the document leaker was arrested in rural Massachusetts for a reason. God was pointing to Massachusetts, and I'll explain in a second, which is why it wasn't in any city in Massachusetts. It was designed by God that it would be solely really about Massachusetts. The headlines were Massachusetts because it wasn't in really any kind of a city. It was in rural Massachusetts, okay? Which is the 2x third state, which confirms the connections here. Now, document leaking is hinting at the leaking of nuclear radioactive material, is what it hints at. And that is confirmed through the name of the guy, whose name is Jack Douglas Teixeira. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but this is how it's spelled. Teixeira. So I assume it's a Latin name, so I don't know. Teixeira, I doubt it's pronounced Teixeira. It's probably a silent X, and it's probably Teixeira. Either way, the etymology of this word is rooted in, it's from the name of a tree. It's a type of tree. But the name of the tree, well, this type of tree has berries, produces berries that if one eats even one of them, they die. It's a very toxic berry, which is why this name for this tree is rooted in the Latin word for toxic. That's why Tahara even looks and sounds a little bit like the Latin, or the English word for toxic, because it's actually rooted in the Latin word for toxic, which is what exactly I'm speaking about here, this leak of toxic radioactive material, which is why it's a document leaker. Now, it was recognized immediately that 21 hints at 3 sets of 7, because as I explained earlier in the clip, 3 sets of 7 is symbolism for God's judgment. The Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment. And again, earlier I said that this day was exactly 37 months, which hints at 3 sets of 7, after Trump trumpeted the national emergency. Well, there's a coming national emergency when the suitcase nuke is predicted to explode on January 13th, which will be 7 plus 7 plus 7 months, 3 sets of 7, after this Tahara toxic document leaker arrest. Now, on this same day, which confirms all of this, is another big story of the day, which was the death, immediate death, of 6,000 plus 6,000 plus 6,000 cows at a farm in Texas. Texas is a hint at Tahara, which is spelled with an X, right? Maybe it's even pronounced Texera. That's clearly designed by God as a rhyming. This is how God's science works. This is why it occurred in Texas. And also, just like the document leaker being arrested in Massachusetts, this farm was in rural Texas, nowhere. So the stories talked about it being in Texas, not a particular city in Texas. 18,000 cows die in Texas is what the headlines of the story. Of course, the 6 plus 6 plus 6 is this Antichrist symbolism, right? Now, the deaths of the cows were a result of an explosion. There was an explosion that led to a massive fire that killed the cows in the farm. I think they were in a barn. I think it was a dairy farm. This explosion, on the same day as the document leaker named Toxic, was stunning confirmation for exactly what we expected for this date, which is the coming explosion of a bomb that will result in toxic radioactive material, which will cause a mass evacuation of Manhattan Island, or at least a portion of it. That was exactly what was expected in advance, and that's what we got. But as I said at the beginning of this video, God does all of this elaborate stuff to tell stories, and this story that I'm about to explain wouldn't have been learned had it not been for this particular step or node in the web of signs. Now, what I'm about to explain is not a substitute for watching the video dedicated to this, even though the video is like a few hours long. And I think even has a part 1 and 2, which is the 54th Massachusetts Regiment video. I'm not going to explain much. You need to watch the video. And like I said, that's the purpose of this prediction, is to get you to watch the other videos so you can learn the stories God has been telling. To miss this is to miss entirely the point of the prediction. And I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction. God wants you to learn about what he has been communicating regarding the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, the first black regiment of the Civil War. That's why this story was about Massachusetts. 21 days later was the date 5-4. This was when it was all put together, realized. The epiphany came. Because we added 21 days to this, I thought, well, why the 21? Because obviously 21 is prophetic because it's 7 plus 7 plus 7. I had no idea at the time that it was because it was also pointing to 7 plus 7 plus 7 months later. But 7 plus 7 plus 7 days later gave us May 4th, and that was a very important step in the trail. It's not explained in this video, though. But that revealed the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which is why this sign in Massachusetts that pointed to the date 5-4. And on that day, for example, we had the 4th out of 4 horses in 5 days, or rather in 5 days, 4 horses deaths at the Kentucky Derby, and on and on. We also had an explosion sign again and all of that, right? There was reason why it's just not just another explosion sign. There's more to the story, right? Which you need to learn. So, actually, I'll be honest, that explosion I don't think is explained in those, because that explosion wasn't learned until like a long time later. But nonetheless, you still need to watch the 54th Massachusetts video. The theme here is this theme of slavery and freedom, which, by the way, involves the number 13. Because the Massachusetts Regiment, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, is known for, officially by policy from Washington, D.C., not being paid the equivalent amount of the other white Northern soldiers, which was $13 a month, which was an example of oppressive minority laws. And also included this theme of currency. After the predicted explosion in New York, the financial system will collapse, and what will emerge will be digital currency, which will then be programmed by the Antichrist system to enforce the mark of the Antichrist and restricting people buying and selling food, the rationed food, to only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist, the so-called good citizens. It's not just oppressive minority law, that's the understatement. It's genocide. It will be a form of genocide, but more specifically, politicide, because it's a political civil war we are in, and depending on one's politics is, in general, is what determines whether one is for or against this thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist, which, by the way, if you take, the Bible prophecy says you go to hell. So, in other words, it's clear which side God is on in this civil war. If you are on the wrong side, make sure you change immediately to the other side, the side that is for freedom and not slavery and socialism and leftism. Because the theme of the Bible and the theme of life is slavery versus freedom. That's why God used the Civil War, which was about slavery versus freedom, to point or use this 54th Massachusetts Regiment sign in order to point to what is coming, as I've just explained now. What confirms this too is this prophetic hockey game on this date, which was played on Montreal Island, which hints at Manhattan Island. The final score was 5-4, which hints at the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And by the way, Massachusetts hints at Manhattan, and also hints at Mississauga, all of these native Indian names. And that's because the Anglophones fled Montreal Island to largely Mississauga, the city next to Toronto, when they were oppressed with oppressive minority laws. The only place in the so-called Free West where people in Quebec that didn't speak French were not allowed to express themselves in their own language. Bill 101, because it was 101 passengers on the Mayflower that reached Massachusetts. Which is why also on the Titanic, the propeller serial number, the big one at the In other words, the serial number of the Titanic is 101, because it, like the Mayflower, sank on its maiden voyage. Well, the Mayflower didn't sink, but the Mayflower came on the maiden voyage of the Pilgrims, and also the 11-ship flotilla. But anyway, what I mean to emphasize here is this connection to the spiritual founding of America and America turning away from God and about to be destroyed and judged because of it. So, the Anglophones fled because of Bill 101 to Mississauga. They fled down the King's Highway, Highway 401, also known as the King's Highway, which is symbolism for the Antichrist king, who is symbolized by, in the Bible, the king of Egypt, from whom the Israelites fled in an evacuation, which is why the evacuation from Montreal Island down King's Highway. 401, Highway 401 between Montreal and Toronto and Mississauga, because 401 is the 22nd superprime number. The 22nd prime number is 79, the 79th prime number is 401. The number 22, the 22nd prime number being 401, 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. The mark of the Antichrist changes a person's chromosomes, and a chromosome is made of two arms which come in pairs, so 2 and 2. But also, the mark of the Antichrist is described in the book of Ezekiel, the inverse of it, and it would have been a Tav mark. The Tav letter is a symbol for a mark, and it is the last letter and 22nd letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, the 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. And so the fleeing the biggest mass migration in North America in the 20th century of Anglophones from Montreal, formerly Canada's biggest city, to Toronto, now Canada's biggest city, after Bill 101, down King's Highway 401, is symbolic of the coming mark of the Antichrist and the oppression of minorities who refuse to take the mark of the Antichrist, namely true Christians, because it is a spiritual abomination. Not only does it alter a person's chromosomes and change who they are, which God can't accept. And by the way, that's the reason why the flood judgment happened, was when they mixed with the Nephilim, the fallen angels, symbolism for all of this. But also, it uses, like all things today, all things in the thing industry use stem cells from unborn babies. And that makes it a spiritual abomination, clearly. But also, taking it enables the system to perpetuate and compel other people to take it. It isn't just about you. It isn't just about the individual. It isn't just, well, I'm making a choice. It's my body. I want to go on vacations. I want to keep my job. So, I respect how you don't want to take it, but I needed to take it. No, my friend. You are guilty. You need to repent. You have taken the mark of the Antichrist, and you are guilty because you enabled the system to continue and compel other people to take it. And that is perhaps the most unrighteous part of it. Because what we are in is a mass formation, a mass hypnosis. And 30% of the population is hypnotized in the totalitarian movement. True believers in the cause. 30% are trying to fight back and get people to wake up. fighting back against the CEN censorship, etc., to get the truth out. And 40% are in the middle. If the 40% that are going along to get along for convenience sake so that they can keep their job and not rock the boat and be able to travel and go on vacations, etc., if they would just stand up for what's right and fight back, the totalitarian movement dissolves. It only continues because there's enough people to keep it going, right? That's how these movements work. So anyway, you get my point. You get my point. Now, that's why the hockey game, and it was a prophetic hockey game because the Bruins, the Boston Bruins it was played in Massachusetts, by the way, and it was played in Boston. This game was played in Montreal. That's why it was prophetic too. But it was Boston, which brings us to Massachusetts again. It was Boston versus the Montreal Canadiens. And it was a prophetic game because one of the records was beaten, maybe the most wins in a season or something to that effect. I was following closely and I could recite to you these stats at the time, but the Boston Bruins were extremely prophetic in the spring of 2023. And it all climaxed also with this game on Montreal Island. Okay? But the reason for Boston is because of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, and that's why the score was 5-4. But the area code for Montreal Island is also 514, which again is more confirmation that this was all pointing to the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And this theme of slavery and freedom, which is what the mark of the Antichrist represents. When you take it, you are a slave to the system. And the limiting of freedom and all of that with the system. Okay, you get the idea. I've explained it. And so the currency is going to be programmed, like I was saying, to restrict the buying and selling of food. I think I said that. Okay. So that's why this is all relevant too. Now, the reason why they fled to Mississauga is because the biggest evacuation in the 20th century was the bomb train, what they call a bomb train, when the toxic freight train carrying toxic gases exploded in Mississauga, causing an evacuation in 1979, which was right at the time, like in the final years of the mass migration. I mean, in other words, most of the migration, the fleeing from Montreal had happened in the few years prior to it. And so, in other words, by the time of the bomb train in Mississauga, Mississauga had become this enormous city because it hadn't been prior to it. And 200,000 people evacuated in the middle of the night. And this is my earliest memory because I was born in Mississauga. God designed all of this all along, this life of mine, for this video. My earliest memory is in 1979 and the emergency evacuation in the middle of the night because of the train that had exploded with the toxic material. Yep. And that's why Mississauga is a part of this story. Now, this date here, April 13th, it was 2023. One of the things that was known about this date ahead of time is that it was exactly 370 weeks, and I already explained the significance of 37, how it is symbolic of 3 sets of 7. It was exactly 370 weeks. Let me just expand on that, because I don't think it's in the clip. Trump was elected, or he was inaugurated, I should say, at the age of 70 or 7 months and 7 days old. 73 days after he won by 77 electoral votes, on the same day that Netanyahu was in office for 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days, him being symbolism for Joshua, the leader of Israel. And that, in turn, was exactly 73 weeks after Trump famously descended the golden escalator in his Trump Tower, the symbolic beginning of Trump. So 73 weeks right there, right? 3 sets of 7. That day was exactly 188 months after the 7.0 earthquake in Joshua Tree, California. And the walls of security collapsed in Jericho after the 3 sets of 7, and the trumpets were blown due to an earthquake. And archaeology proves this. And they were led by Joshua. The reason for the 188 months is because the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word for woe, exclamation mark, used in the context of extreme judgment from God in the Bible. Okay, so back to what I was saying. This date here, I'm talking about this theme of Mississauga now, and how the Montreal Island hockey game pointed to it. Oh, and by the way, also on this day, the S&P 500 gained 54 points on the 5-4 game day, 7 plus 7 plus 7 days before the date, 5-4 as I mentioned. The S&P 500 gained 54 points, and that's relevant too because 500 in the Greek concordance, G500 is the word for Antichrist. Okay. So yes, the S&P 500 gained 54 points on this day too. But anyway, it all points to Mississauga because that's the point of pointing to Montreal Island, the mass evacuation and the fleeing down the King's Highway to Mississauga. Now, and that all points to the bomb train, which is what we're talking about because this is this theme. And by the way, that's when the bomb train happened in East Palestine. The night before, God, I can only lay this at the feet of God. I don't know how this happened, the coincidence of the timing, but I was online surfing, learning about the train derailment and the bomb train in Mississauga. And then the next day was the bomb train in Ohio. And by the way, Ontario rhymes with Ohio. Mississauga, Ontario. I mean, that's amazing. And then they're both native language words too. Ohio, Ontario. I mean, okay. So the bomb train in East Palestine is another prophetic sign. It's pointing to all of this. But that's when I realized that there would be an mass as a result of the bomb. Because like I said at the beginning of the video, I've known that the bomb was going to happen in Manhattan since July of 2019. But it wasn't until the February of 2023 that I realized that there would be a mass evacuation from Manhattan Island due to toxic material. Okay, so back to this story of Mississauga that I'm talking about. This date here, again, this connection I'm explaining was known ahead of time, was exactly 370 weeks after the Prime Minister of Canada met the President of the U.S. for a state dinner in Washington, D.C. on March 10th, 2016. Okay? Justin Trudeau met or had a state dinner with Barack Obama at the White House on this date. During the state dinner, Barack Obama talked about his visit to Canada, which was incidentally, not coincidentally, it's prophetic, right in the summer of when he rose to power. I mean, literally, it was like just days before he became a national thing. Because he became a national thing when he gave the speech at the Democrat convention. And I think it was the second last speech or something. So he gave this big speech. The Democrat Party was clearly putting him on stage, saying that he was the future of the party, despite him being the most radical senator in the U.S. Senate in terms of voting record. But that didn't matter. He spoke well. He was a nice speaking, Barack Obama is the speaker. In fact, Bible prophecy says that this particular, the second of the two antichrists, speaks like a dragon. So in other words, Bible prophecy speaks on this antichrist's ability to speak. And that's Obama. He became the president on his ability to deliver a speech. Period. Right? And, well, not period. I mean, he tapped into evil. He spoke the leftism language, which is evil. Well, anyway, let's get back to what I was saying. So Barack Obama had Justin Trudeau at the White House. Now, this was just after Trudeau was elected in November of 2015, just a few months after. It was November 4th, 2015, exactly 7 years after Barack Obama was elected, the 44th president, on the date 11/4, which since at 11 times 4 equals 44. Now, I spoke earlier about the significance of 7 years. Again, in Bible prophecy, 7 years symbolizes the period of the end. But also, it's equivalent to 84, which is the equivalent of, in gematria, the name Obama and the word bomb. In other words, the 7 years connection in between the election of these two partners in crime, the Antichrist and his partner in crime, the Prime Minister of Canada, the 51st state, because Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president before he becomes the president again. This connection is ultimately pointing to the predicted bomb, because 84 months hints at bomb, and they were elected exactly 84 months apart. And that's quite significant because unlike elections in the US, elections in Canada don't occur in the same month every year, let alone the same date. I mean, an election in Canada can occur on any date of the year. I mean, I don't think they're ever going to have it on a Sunday, but you know what I'm saying. And that's why it's even more special that we have this exact 7 years or 84 months connection between their two elections. Now, also, Justin Trudeau is the 23rd Prime Minister. And I explained earlier how God's big picture of signs works on pairing 23 and 44 together. That's how the big picture works. It works on pairing these numbers together, as I've been explaining in this diagram in this video. So the two antichrists, if you will, because Justin Trudeau isn't technically one of the two antichrists in Bible prophecy, although I do suspect he is, the 10 kings symbolizes this, if you know what I'm talking about in Bible prophecy. But anyway, these two partners in crime, let's just put it that way, are the 23rd and 44th leaders of their nations. That's astounding beyond words. And they were elected 77 years. And by the way, Barack Obama was born on the date 8/4. I forgot to mention that earlier. Not only does his name equal 84, and it's the word bomb, but he was born on the date 8/4, August 4th. And speaking of dates, that's what this is about, because it's the date 11/4, and which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44. And it's the 4th of the month, and the day that Obama was elected was exactly 579 months after he was born, both being the 4th days of the month. 579 is prophetic because God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and 579 is equal to 193 plus 193 plus 193. And 193 is the 44th prime number. In other words, it's the 44th prime number plus the 44th prime number plus the 44th prime number between the birth of the 44th president and the election of the 44th president. Yes, that's amazing. But back to what I was saying. Now, there's something that's widely known called the Richard Nixon prophecy. President Nixon visited Ottawa, Canada for a state dinner in, I forget which year. Let's see. I can figure it out because that's part of the prophecy. It was in March of 1972. And at the dinner, President Nixon gave a toast. The dinner, by the way, was hosted by Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Justin Trudeau's father. Okay? So Justin Trudeau, the 23rd Prime Minister of Canada, is the son of Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who had Nixon at the Capitol for a state dinner in March of 1972. Okay? At the dinner, Richard Nixon toasted to Pierre Trudeau, or not to Trudeau, but he gave a toast. And his toast was to the future Prime Minister of Canada, referring to 4-month-old Justin Trudeau. Okay? And then Justin Trudeau became the Prime Minister of Canada. All right? That's the Richard Nixon prophecy. And then Barack Obama mentioned this prophecy by Richard Nixon at the state dinner in Washington, D.C., when Justin Trudeau had dinner with Barack Obama. So it was like the state dinner in Washington was like a fulfillment of this prophecy, if you will, because the prophecy was made at a state dinner, and then Justin Trudeau was at a state dinner shortly after he was elected. Who knows? That's maybe even why Barack Obama decided to have Justin Trudeau for a state dinner so soon after he was elected. But probably also because the two are kindred spirits, and they knew that because they're on the same spectrum. They're both leftism religionists. They're both members of the most dynamic religion of the 20th century that has conquered every aspect of culture in the West. Okay, so anyway, that's the Richard Nixon prophecy. But what isn't known and is only being spoken of in this video is the true extent of this prophecy. Because at the time, Justin Trudeau was 4 months old, and the state dinner was exactly 44 years to the month after the Richard Nixon prophecy. In other words, Nixon toasted to the future Prime Minister, the 4-month-old Justin Trudeau, and 44 years later to the month, Justin Trudeau attended a state dinner with the Antichrist, the 44th president. In other words, it identified the 44th president as the Antichrist. And furthermore, Justin Trudeau is the 23rd Prime Minister who was elected exactly 84 months, or 7 years, after the election of the 44th president. That is the Richard Nixon prophecy. Now, here's the thing. During the state dinner, during Obama's speech, if you will, Obama mentioned the name Mississauga 3 times. Mississauga is the 7th biggest city in Canada. It was a 3 sets of 7. And I've, prior to this, explained the prophetic significance of Mississauga with its bomb train symbolism and the fleeing of oppressive minority laws, which is what's coming from the Antichrist. Obama mentioned Mississauga 3 times in a row because he was jokingly having trouble pronouncing the name. And fair enough, when you look at the name on a piece of paper and you are not from Canada, you would not know how to pronounce Mississauga. So he made a joke about it. He, jokingly, half-heartedly attempted to pronounce it twice. Then a third time, he pretty much got it. Or not, I forget. But he did it 3 times. And Canada is the 7th biggest city. But this was after he mentioned the Richard Nixon prophecy. And Richard Nixon was the 37th president. That's right. And this day, this state dinner about the 37th president's prophecy, in which Obama mentioned Mississauga 3 times, the 7th biggest city. This day was exactly 370 weeks before this date, which included the prophetic hockey game in Montreal, on Montreal Island in Canada. In the area code 514, the game score was 5-4. In other words, it pointed to Montreal Island, because that's the area code of Montreal Island, which points to Manhattan Island and the coming explosion. Now, in the process of talking about Mississauga, he went like this. And I have a clip of it, by the way, in the must-watch East Palestine video. You must watch it. Like I said at the beginning, you must watch the 54th Massachusetts video and you must watch the East Palestine video, okay? But in it, there's a clip, and believe me, you need to watch those videos, okay? In there is a clip of Obama saying this. But he says basically the 3 attempts to pronounce Mississauga, a place that he said he went to, and then he said, and then I went to Toronto and Niagara Falls, as a joke. He said it like that. He said it like that too, like out of breath. And then I went to Toronto and Niagara Falls, the easy place that everyone knows, you know? Okay, so Niagara Falls, because this is symbolism for Noah's flood, the power of water moving over the earth. Also, God is pointing to the historic barge that is stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River. Niagara is native language meaning straight and narrow way, which refers to Christ. And the rocks are symbolic of Christ. The barge is stuck on the rocks. It's symbolic of the ark in Noah's flood, which is also symbolic of Christ. And the barge was involved in the most dramatic rescue in the history of Niagara Falls, which symbolizes the rescue of Noah and his family, which involved, by the way, the U.S. Coast Guard, making it also a U.S. sign, because it's stuck on the Canadian side of the falls, which is the horseshoe side of the falls. And the predicted date that the barge will crash over Niagara Falls, by the way, is August 6th, 7 days before the predicted solar flare will knock out the power in North America, and Niagara Falls is known for generating power. And 7 days because of the 7 days warning and the count of the flood. And also Niagara Falls engenders a perennial rainbow, and Barack Obama is the rainbow president. But he visited all of this right before he rose to power, like I was saying, with the speech, right at the same month even. And what else is to say? There's a couple other things. Let me just finish this Niagara Falls thing, because Niagara Falls, the horseshoe of it, is directly pointing to the CN Tower. In other words, it's a game of horseshoes. Because in a game of horseshoes, you aim the horseshoe straight ahead at the metal stick. The CN Tower is symbolic of the metal stick that the horseshoe falls is 100% directly pointing to. Go look at it on Google Maps if you would like. It points to the stick because it's pointing to a symbolic game of horseshoes. But why is that? God is pointing to this because, well, let me say this first. The CN Tower in God's signs, not just me saying this, in God's signs is symbolic of the Tower of Babel. And Toronto, a place that I grew up but not as an adult, I left Toronto, the suburbs of Toronto, and I, like I mentioned, was born in Mississauga when I went to university. But I know the city well, because my family has lived there ever since then. And it is the Tower of Babel city. The leftists decided it would be a good idea to fill Canada with the cultures of the world, as if it were an empty box with which to stuff the other cultures of the world, and they've made it in Toronto the city of the Tower of Babel. And that city is symbolized as being the Tower of Babel city with its metal stick, with the CN Tower. Anyway, the reason why the Niagara Falls, and by the way, the Tower of Babel story is Antichrist. That's the purpose. That's the point. The coming together of the different peoples, the world is communism, it's socialism, right? Jesus said, do not think I came to bring unity and peace, but I came to bring division with the sword. If you don't understand that, you don't understand Jesus and also God's prerogative and his plan with a capital P. That's why the opposite of the plan is collectivism, which is why it's evil and inevitably leads to evil and the restricting of human rights. But it's because, by nature, God's plan is to divide. I mean, Genesis begins with division. He divided the night and the day and the waters from the earth, etc. He's in the process of dividing the sheep from the goats, the wheat from the chaff. That's what this purpose of all of this is. The Satan, the enemy, knows this, and that's why it's all about collectivism and unity coming together in a Tower of Babel, an attempt to reach heaven collectively with technology and with human ingenuity without God. That's the Tower of Babel story in a nutshell, right? Okay. Which incidentally is Genesis chapter 11, which is why the Twin Towers were replaced with the one tower and the one world tower, and the Twin Towers looked like a giant 11 in the 11th state, and were struck by Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people in New York City, which is made of 11 letters. Anyway, the reason for God pointing to this with the Niagara Falls barge is that when the asteroid hits Earth, as described in the book of Revelation, there will be an earthquake that causes the waters of the Great Lakes to spill out over the Midwest. That's what the power of water with the Niagara Falls is pointing to. It's going to spill out. Lake Ontario is going to spill out over the Tower of Babel City. All right. Okay. So, which is, by the way, Canada's biggest city and the fourth biggest city in North America. Okay. So, back to the 370 weeks connection. Another thing about Obama being in Mississauga is that the reason why he was in Mississauga, because he was visiting, by the way, his half-sister. And so, but they went to a restaurant in Mississauga. That's his time in Mississauga. And I discovered the name of the restaurant, and I forget the name now, but it has in its title Mountain or Mountain View or something. It's a high place. That's because the name Bama in Hebrew means high place. Both lowercase b and capital B, proper noun, high place. Bama, high place. Because in the Bible, the Jews would conduct false religious worship to their false gods on the tops of mountains. High places is a euphemism in the Bible for this. So that's why Obama's name is High Place. It's Antichrist false worship symbolism. And leftism is a false religion. And it is a religion with many isms embedded in it. Okay. So I think I've successfully established this connection to Mississauga, the 370 weeks connection, and the significance of Obama saying Mississauga 3 times. It all points to the bomb train, but it also ties into this hockey game in Montreal Island, which is why Mississauga, because as I've explained, which also is about Massachusetts. This was on the day of the arrest of the Massachusetts documents leaker, which instead leaking of radioactive material and evacuation, just like the evacuation from Montreal Island down Kings Highway. You know, you get the idea now, right? All right, we are almost done this truly profound diagram. Now, this Manhattan blackout, which connects to the Manhattan Project, as I explained, and also the day of the Hurricane Barry, which hints at Barack Obama, the predicted future 48th president, is exactly 22 times 3 months before the predicted bomb, which will lead to Barack Obama becoming the 48th president. 22 times 3 hints at 223, which is the 48th prime number. Also, it's 3 times 22 months. And that's because this is very important and points to this verse in Genesis chapter 3, verse 22, which symbolizes this coming big lie at the end of the age, which was the lie at the beginning of the age, which was when the serpent, Satan, told Eve in the garden that she shall surely not die. The coming promise of immortality without God through demons pretending to be aliens is coming. And it'll be the big lie at the end of the age that's making the age come full circle. And it'll be involved in it, and it will involve the mark of the Antichrist, this promise of immortality. It is Tower of Babel, trying to reach the heavens, immortality, be like God without God, which is leftism, which is socialism, and secular atheism, because the two are flip sides of the same coin. When you lose God, you inevitably, like a law of the universe, get communism. You get totalitarianism. It is the default, first of all, it is the default form of society. And the only reason why it doesn't exist in North America today and other places in the world is because of the influence of America and the Christian civilization. But when you get rid of it, the vacuum is inevitably filled with communism and totalitarianism. That's just the way it works. The founders knew it. John Adams said, we have something, we created something that is only applicable only for a moral and religious people. It is completely unapplicable for any other people. I'm paraphrasing. That's what he said, though. Okay? And all of the founders agreed. They all said similar things. Okay? Even Washington said it in his inauguration address, I believe. Or was it his farewell speech? I forget. Anyway, one more thing for this, one more trail of signs here for this diagram. We were at the Hawaii missile alert, the false missile alert in Hawaii, the home state of the 44th president. And exactly 44 weeks later was the announcement of the discovery of the Argentine submarine and the tragedy of the deaths of 44 sailors that were on the sub. And in Argentina, the tragedy is referred to colloquially as the 44 sailors, which is confirmation of the 44 weeks. But this submarine is also, the story of the submarine involves an explosion, because the international effort to search for the submarine after it sank revolved around the detected explosion by the agency responsible for detecting underwater, under-ocean nuclear detonations to prevent nuclear testing under the ocean. So this explosion was detected by the nuclear organization involved in detecting explosions. That's why this is an explosion sign. And it was announced almost exactly a year later, one day exactly, more than a year. And 1 year is 4 plus 4 plus 4 months. So that also hints at the 44th president and the 44 sailors. Okay, now this day was known ahead of time, and one reason being is that it was the date 99 and 5779 in the Hebrew calendar. And the number 9 is the most important number in God's sciences from the Bible. It symbolizes God's judgment. That's why 9 days before this, I also expected something, and that was the day of the campfire, also known as the Paradise, California fire, the apocalyptic burning and evacuation of Paradise, California. So here we have our evacuation sign in context of an explosion sign. Because on this day, Trump visited Paradise, California, God's trumpet. But it was also the date 9/9/5779, 9 days after the start of the fire. All right? And Trump visited Paradise, California on this day. So you have this evacuation, because it was the apocalyptic evacuation of this place, Paradise, California, that burned really almost instantaneously. And then it was also partly burned was Helltown, which was right near Paradise, California. Okay, you get the idea here. Paradise, because Peter said that the coming judgment would be symbolized by fire and not by water. The first judgment was symbolized by water. Okay. The flood. Okay, actually the first judgment was when Adam and Eve were kicked out of paradise. Okay, so the Garden of Eden. Now, the thing is that Trump's day in Paradise, California, was the 666th day he was in office, which gives us Antichrist symbolism. And again, he is trumpet, God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs. Because then again, in archaic English, the name Trump or the word Trump means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. Trump was trumpeting judgment in paradise on the date 9/9/5779, 666 days after he left office, which is also, or was, 666 days after Obama left office. And Obama is the Antichrist, the 44th president, hence the 44 sailors and the explosion sign. Okay. Also on this day, on 9/9/5779, the UN passed 9 resolutions condemning Israel. And the Antichrist in the end times will lead the world in an effort to divide God's land and make Jerusalem an international city, the biggest transgression the world will make, for which it will be judged in the end. All of this 9s here is why we had 9 days to get to this prophetic sign, which was the 7 minutes of terror before the NASA probe InSight landed on Mars, the red planet, which is the red dragon that's thrown down from heaven to earth in the book of Revelation. This probe's mission is to detect Mars quakes, which are essentially explosions. Or at least, if anything, symbolism for explosions. So we have a detecting explosions sign 9 days after the explosion detection sign, because again, this sign is about the detection of the explosion of the 44 sailors submarine. And by the way, also God pairs 44 and 9 because the 44th president was inaugurated in 09. And that's how God's signs works, as I explained. That also pairs with the 44 weeks, as I explained. So does the 9 resolutions pair with the 44 weeks. Okay, and the date 9/9. So that's how God's signs works, pairing these 9 numbers together. 9 and 23, 9 and 44, 44 and 23, as I've explained. Now, one last connection here. This is amazing too, because in simple English gematria, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, the word bomb is equal to 32. And so from this detection of explosions sign, this NASA InSight sign, it is exactly 320 weeks to the predicted explosion in New York City. Also, the name Obama in simple English gematria equals 32. And again, Obama will become the president again through the coming martial law and the emergency after this predicted explosion in New York City. Also, Obama will be the 48th president, and 32 is equal to 4 times 8. Also, Obama was born on the date 8/4, and 32 is equal to 8 times 4. And also, Obama is equal to 84 in Hebrew gematria. Also, the only president to serve more than 2 terms was the 32nd president. Barack Obama will serve more than 2 terms. He will serve a 3rd term, just like the 32nd president. And the number 32 is 4 times 8, and Barack Obama is predicted to be the 48th president. Now, there's another aspect to this Mississauga bomb train prophecy. Well, there's actually tons more. Like I said, the full explanation is in the other video that I made that, like I said, leads to February 3rd, 2024. Like I said, it's a must watch. But I'm giving you a surface level explanation here, and I don't mean for it to be a substitute for the other fuller explanation. But I got to make a video anyway in this context of this diagram. And so what else should be added here is the mayor of Mississauga. The mayor of Mississauga, during the time of the bomb train, well, let's back up. Let's talk about the date of the bomb train. That was November 10th, 1979. 1979 is an extremely important year in God's signs for many, many reasons. And that's explained more so in the Jimmy Carter videos. It was during the time of the Carter presidency, and the Jimmy Carter presidency is extremely prophetic. And I have made many videos talking about it. Okay, so, and essentially too, it's pointing to a 7 years of prophetic signs followed by an 8th and a 9th year of the judgment and destruction for America. And on that note, that leads us to the end at the end of 2026. And the bomb train in Mississauga was 2 months and 26 days after the release of the extremely prophetic Apocalypse Now video. The Apocalypse Now video is a video, or rather I should say movie. A movie is a prophetic sign from God that is communicating in God's signs the apocalypse beginning now. But there's so much to say and has been said in other videos, and like I'm saying in the Jimmy Carter videos, that explains this. And so anyway, but the reason why 2 months and 26 days is relevant, not only does it hint at 2026, that's how huge this is, by the way. This Mississauga bomb train, that it would be connecting with a number that communicates the end and the return of Lord Jesus Christ, which begins with the 2 years of destruction, begins after the 7 years of prophetic signs with the predicted bomb in New York City that's being pointed to with the bomb train. The 79, right? The 7 years have passed from 2017 until 2024, the end of which. And then we have 2025, 2026 as being this symbolic 9, if you will, the 8th and 9th year following the 7th. So that's why 79, Apocalypse Now. The Apocalypse Now was released 2 months and 26 days before the bomb train that I'm talking about, the biggest evacuation in North American history in Mississauga. Okay, and again, that these two signs were in 1979 because of the 7 years plus the 8th and 9th year, symbolized by 79, which leads us to the end of 2026 and the return of Lord Jesus Christ and Judgment Day. Okay, so that's that. Oh, the reason again, not only is it for the purpose of pointing to 2026, 2 months and 26 days, but God is using this frequently in his big picture of signs because H226 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word that means prophetic sign. And so that's what this is. The bomb train and the Apocalypse Now are prophetic signs. Also, this is important, huge. Again, I said that God pairs 23 and 44 to confirm the signs and connections. And again, this prophecy between Obama and Trudeau is about the 44th president and the 23rd prime minister. This Canadian bomb train in Mississauga, Ontario, was 2 times 3 days, which hints at 23, after 11/4, the date that Obama and Trudeau were elected, which was the beginning of the 444-day Iran hostage crisis, which coincided with the last 444 days of Carter's presidency, because there are many parallels between Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama, including them claiming to be quote-unquote Christian. Anyway, there's lots to be said, and I explained this in other videos, including the Jimmy Carter malaise video, and also another recent video. And so I won't explain that anymore. The parallels between Obama and Carter, that's for the subject of another video anyway. We want to stay focused here. Like I said, it's very difficult to keep focused because God's big picture of signs is not linear. It's interconnected and infinite. But the 444-day Iran hostage crisis also led to the attempted rescue of the hostages, in which resulted in a plane crash. Barack Obama, the 44th president, will become the president again as a result of this bomb, and Kamala Harris's predicted death in a plane crash. And that plane crash in the attempted rescue of the hostages during the 444-day Iran hostage crisis led to the deaths of 4 plus 4 military service personnel and 4 injured in Operation Eagle Claw. All right. There's all kinds of symbolism in the hostage crisis as well, but it's a subject for another video. Okay, so let's just keep it at that. But this all does point to the 44th president. That's why this occurred on the date 11/4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44, I should say, which is why the 44th president was elected on the date 11/4. The 23rd Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, was also elected on the date 11/4, and that was exactly 36 years after the beginning of the 444-day Iran hostage crisis. 36, like I said earlier, explained earlier, hints at 666. It's 3 6s. It hints at 3 6s. It is also 6 times 6 and also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And the 36th triangular number in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. So this is more confirmation that indeed this is a prophecy identifying the Antichrist, whose number is 666 in Bible prophecy. And also that Justin Trudeau is a partner in crime. And I'll just say this too. It was yesterday. I believe it was yesterday. Well, it depends which time zone. Anyway, it was either yesterday or 2 days ago that Justin Trudeau announced that he would resign. The news broke a couple of days before that, or leaked, that he was about to resign. But it was unclear whether he would resign immediately or stay on until another new leader for the Liberal Party would be chosen. And I said there's absolutely, I predicted there's no way that it'll be anything other than him staying on until there's a new leader, because he is the partner in crime in the end times with Barack Obama. He isn't going to leave. And his resignation means that we are on the doorstep of the emergency. That's why he's the Emergencies Act Prime Minister. The fact that he's leaving soon means that the end is going to begin within that period of time. Which like I'm saying in this video, predicting to be right now. January 13th, the explosion for the bomb. Okay, the predicted bomb in New York. So, the other thing is, too, what I wanted to get at here is part of this story, which is amazing and hasn't been told yet, which is the story of the mayor of Mississauga, Mayor Hazel McCallion. Hazel McCallion, or I should say Mayor Hazel McCallion, is, for whatever better or worse, she is an icon. She is an icon in Canadian politics. She was the mayor of this city of Mississauga for 36 years, which is why, incidentally, Justin Trudeau was elected exactly 36 years after the beginning of the Iran hostage crisis. So this is Antichrist symbolism. I'm not saying anything about McCallion. Let's just leave it at that. She is an important symbol in God's signs here. She presided over the evacuation, the mass migration from Montreal to Mississauga. She oversaw the expansion of her city. It was during her reign that Mississauga became the 7th biggest city in Canada. So she saw it from small beginnings, relatively, to become what it is today. And it was largely because of this mass migration from Montreal. I mean, basically, Montreal was transplanted to Toronto, and the place to grow was right next to Toronto, which was the city of Mississauga. All right? So, she was mayor for an astounding 36 years. And I believe the only reason why she retired is because of her age. And she became mayor not at a young age, incidentally. I don't know the age, but I do know the age at which she died, which was not long after she retired. She died at the age of 101. And that is amazing beyond words, because she presided over the mass migration from Montreal to Mississauga due to Bill 101. That's right. The oppressive minority laws, that is symbolism. Not only that, by the way, it's symbolism for the oppressive minority laws of the Israelites in Egypt, if I didn't mention that. It's symbolism for the Exodus. In fact, I did fail to mention this earlier. The coming predicted evacuation from Manhattan Island is also symbolism for the evacuation from Exodus. But that also is symbolism for the coming evacuation of God's people in the rapture. Forgot to mention that. That's extremely important. That's what all of this evacuation and mass migration symbolism is all about. What's ironic too, though, is that Montreal, and I think it still is, but probably isn't today, but could be wrong, could still be the biggest center of Jewish population in Canada. Probably Toronto now, though, given that Toronto displaced Montreal in demographics in general. But so that is the irony too, is that again, they fled down the highway that connects the two cities, which is the King's Highway. And the Israelites fled the king of Egypt. And so a lot of the people that fled Montreal to Mississauga would have been Jews. Oh, and there's another parallel. The people that fled were the people that built Montreal. It wasn't Francophones that built Montreal. Montreal was an Anglo city, and it always has been. Because the Catholic Church in history encouraged the French to stay out of the city and in the rural countryside of Quebec. And so Montreal, the city on Montreal Island in the river, in the St. Lawrence River, was built by Anglophones. That's the irony also. But that's the case with ancient Egypt. The biblical story is how the Jews were very important in the building of ancient Egypt before they had to flee, before they were oppressed, before they were resented. Okay. So that's another amazing parallel. Anyway, we have Hazel McCallion dying at the age of 101 because God is pointing to Bill 101, in which she presided over. She presided over this time, like I just have explained, right? It's so amazing. She was the mayor during the time that people were fleeing because of Bill 101. And she was mayor for 36 years, which is a number that symbolizes 666, the number of the Antichrist. And the Antichrist will enforce the mark of the Antichrist with oppressive minority laws. Okay? Now, Hazel McCallion also was nicknamed Hurricane Hazel. That's because she became mayor not long after a very famous hurricane that hit Toronto. you probably never heard of a hurricane hitting Toronto. That's because hurricanes don't hit Toronto. If you know where Toronto is, it's far inland. This was a prophetic thing from God to give Hurricane Hazel her nickname for the prophetic purposes of what I'm explaining here. So there was this what would you call it? A weather event that, I mean, can be explained but shouldn't have happened. But there was a system that used, I don't know, I forget, it's been a while since I read about it, but the atmosphere provided that the hurricane skipped over some land and then came down essentially and targeted Toronto with the rain, with the massive amount of rain from the hurricane, which caused unprecedented flooding in Toronto and the deaths of 81 people. And if I recall, they were living on an island in the river. Wow. I could be wrong, and I'm not going to look it up. You should look it up if you're interested. But I'm pretty sure it was an island, and that's amazing, and I never connected the two until just now, because of course we're talking about the escape from Montreal Island and Manhattan Island. But there was an island in Toronto in the river in the valley, which people dwelled on, and it killed 81 people, and that's extremely prophetic, because 81 is a number that symbolizes 9/11. Not only were there 81 passengers on the first plane that struck the first tower, which, by the way, hints at 9, because 8 plus 1 equals 9, and it was a crew of 11 on that flight. With a crew of 11 and passenger number hinting at 9, you have a 9/11. The same was true with the second flight. There was 9 crew and 56 passengers, and 56 hints at 11. 5 plus 6 is 11. But anyway, also, 9 divided by 11 is equal to 0.8181 into infinity. So 81 is a number that embeds in it the 9/11 warning of judgment. And that warning of judgment points back to Massachusetts, which is, like I explained earlier, a rhyme with Mississauga. Both of these native Indian names that are really long and hard to pronounce and begin with an M, obviously, and have some S's in it. Okay, so it's clearly a parallel here. Mississauga is designed by God to be hinting at Massachusetts, and I'm in the process of proving that to you, and how this all comes together, and why she died at 101, and furthermore, why it was Bill 101 that had the oppressive minority laws. This is all because of the pilgrims that were escaping oppressive minority laws by the king. And they came to the New World, like I explained it probably earlier, thinking in their minds that the New World represented their promised land. And they saw, literally, their crossing of the Atlantic as analogous to the Israelites escaping religious persecution or minority persecution from the king of Egypt. And again, they fled Bill 101 down the King's Highway, just to remind you again. All right, now, and so when the Israelites crossed the Jordan River, that was analogous for the pilgrims to them crossing the Atlantic. And how many passengers were there? 101. Yep. How many days did it take? It took an unexpected, I think, triple the time that they expected. They got blown off course, way off course by a storm designed by God, and got hooked into Cape Cod, which if you look at the geography of it, it is a fish hook because God is fishing for men. Yes, that's right. God fished for men with the pilgrims. And he fished for the pilgrims and the fished for men to make his nation of disciples, America. But anyway, it took them 66 days to cross the Atlantic, and 66 is the 11th triangular number. In a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 11th row is 66. Because God is pointing to this number, 11, including with the 101 passengers. The 101 passengers hints at the number 11, as I will explain here. And so does Bill 101 and her age at 101. The reason for the number, well, also, after the Pilgrims in 1620 on the Mayflower, John Winthrop led the 11 ship flotilla and founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony and Boston. Before they departed their ships, John Winthrop delivered his famous City on a Shining Hill sermon that Ronald Reagan cited in his farewell speech, which incidentally was on the date 1/11, another hint at 11, in 1989. And that's also, 1989 is also prophetic, because it's 13 times 153, and in Jesus' last miracle, 153 fish were caught in the net, and 13 represents him and the 12 disciples that started the age of fishing for men. And so 1989 symbolizes the end of the age of fishing for men. And it's only symbolism. It was a sign that symbolized the end, and including Reagan's speech, which, by the way, was exactly 40 weeks before the World Series earthquake. And Jesus used the metaphor of birth pains in context of earthquake signs regarding his return. And according to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. And so that's why God uses these 40 weeks, but it connects with 40 weeks to an earthquake, the very famous one. And anyway, that's getting off subject now. Back to what I was saying about the number 11, though. The reason for all of the 11, let me just hold off. So you've got the Pilgrims on the Mayflower, 101. Their journey was the 11th triangular number of days. The 11-ship flotilla. And you've got the Titanic also, which was a prophetic sign of judgment from God for America. And it sank on its maiden voyage because it was symbolism for the maiden voyage of the Pilgrims. And the big serial number on the giant propeller of the Titanic is 101. At the bottom of the ocean, it's 101 right there. Symbolism for man's hubris, incidentally, thinking that this was the unsinkable ship. Okay, now, John Winthrop, after he delivered that City on a Shining Hill speech, well, I'll say the speech first. Okay, so the reason why all of the 11 is that the number 11 is symbolism for reflection. If God were to symbolize this concept of mirror or reflection, it would be a 1 and a 1, 2 straight lines. And it wouldn't be 22 or 33, it would be 11. But the reason for that is because John Winthrop's speech, his famous speech, was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28, which was the words from Moses from God to the Israelites before they crossed into the promised land. Deuteronomy chapter 28 regards God's promises for either blessings or curses, depending on whether or not they obey his commandments or not, after they enter the promised land. And you really need to read Deuteronomy chapter 28. In fact, you can see in Deuteronomy chapter 28, 9/11. For example, it talks about an eagle swooping down in the section of the curses, and on the tail of the plane that struck the towers was an eagle. It was an American Eagle flight, but there was a giant eagle on the tail of the plane, and the plane was swooping down. Also, the chapter talks about the Israelites walking on iron and the sky being bronze. That was 9/11. With all of the debris of the iron on the ground and the sky being bronze red because of the smoke, if you recall. Okay. Well, the thing is, John Winthrop, the first governor of Massachusetts, lived on Governor's Island, which today is where Logan Airport is. And it was from Logan Airport that Flight 11, with its crew of 11 people, flew into the Twin Towers, was hijacked and then flown into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, in New York City, a name made of 11 letters. This all points to John Winthrop's speech, okay? And so the coming curse of the Antichrist king is the reverse of the pilgrims escaping persecution from the King of England. It's the promised curses for America and destruction of America, which is the symbolism in this Bill 101 and oppressive minority laws. God's people are about to be persecuted by the Antichrist king with oppressive minority laws. That's why the mayor was mayor for 36 years, which ends at 666, and died at the age of 101. And she presided over Mississauga, which ends at Massachusetts. And the Pilgrims leaving England was also a form of exodus, evacuation, like the exodus from Montreal Island to Mississauga. The Pilgrims' exodus from the old world to Massachusetts. Now, the mayor saw her city grow from a small city to the 7th biggest city in Canada, and her prophetic funeral in 2023 is exactly 700 days before the predicted bomb in Manhattan and the predicted evacuation exodus from Manhattan Island. Oh, and if I forgot to mention, Mayor Hazel McCallion, Hurricane Hazel, she presided during the time of the bomb train. She became a hero in the process, and that's why she was mayor for 36 years. She was a hero in this moment of crisis, the largest evacuation in North American 20th century. Besides Hurricane Katrina. It was until Hurricane Katrina. And so her prophetic funeral, at which Obama's partner in crime, Justin Trudeau, spoke at, after she died at 101, was coincidentally, and it was a coincidence because she died when she died, and you have to have a funeral, a certain amount of time after that. Her funeral was on February 14th, 2023, and that was coincidentally Hazel McCallion Day. I mean, there was a holiday made in Ontario prior to her death. So her funeral was on Hazel McCallion Day. Okay, but the Antichrist in partner in crime, Justin Trudeau, spoke at that, and it was 700 days, and she presided over her city, becoming the 7th biggest city. And again, as I explained earlier, Obama mentioned Mississauga 3 times, which gave it 3 sets of 7. And that day was 370 weeks before the April 13th, 2023 sign, as I just explained earlier. So So that 700 days is also 22 months and 30 days before January 13th, 2025. And that also is a hint at, like I explained earlier, 223, which is the 48th prime number. And again, the predicted explosion is predicted to lead to the 48th president, Barack Obama. Okay, but also this period of time is 191% of a year. And that's a number that hints at 9/11. Okay, God has used other 191 connections to hint at 9/11. It's very simple, right? It's obviously 2 1s and a 9. But again, Hurricane Hazel got her nickname from the 9 times 9 deaths from the hurricane, and she died at the age of 101, and that's a hint at 9/11. And her funeral, her prophetic funeral, is 191% of a year to the predicted bomb and evacuation from Manhattan Island. And she, of course, is symbolism for evacuation because of the bomb train and the evacuation from Montreal Island. Now, also, to confirm all of this even, God is brilliant. He gave us another sign, which was an evacuation due to toxic gas and material in the 48th state, which confirms all of this. So again, this date connects with the symbolic 22 months and 30 days, which hints at 223, the 48th prime number. But on the day of her prophetic funeral, there was an explosion and an evacuation in the 48th state. Well, I don't know if it was an explosion, but I can't recall, but there was a truck that crashed on the I-10 highway in Tucson, Arizona, where I used to live. And God has been using the I-10 to hint at 110. And that's because of Joshua, who led the Israelites around the walls of security and into the promised land on the date 110 and died at the age of 110. And around the walls of security, and on 9/11, and the walls of security collapsed on Jericho in God's judgment. And on 9/11, 110 floors of the Twin Towers collapsed in God's judgment in the towers that looked like a giant 11. But this evacuation caused by the truck that crashed with the toxic material on the I-10 and the closure of the I-10 hints at 110 and hints therefore at 9/11. And it connects with 191% of a year. But it's also the 48th state, and it connects with the, again, symbolic 48th prime number of period of time, like I just explained. So there you have it. Now, there's another detail that I forget. There's a university, and I think it's in Massachusetts. I'm pretty sure it was in Massachusetts, that on this date, the date of the closure of the I-10 in the 48th state and Hazel McCallion's prophetic funeral was the opening day of a big exhibit of the, I think, the life of Barack Obama, or perhaps his presidency, probably his presidency. Anyway, it was a big deal at that particular university. But anyway, so I think I've explained this story now. Had to include the Hazel McCallion, mayor of Mississauga, part of this prophecy. One thing that I forgot to mention here that's very significant regarding the Richard Nixon prophecy and the purpose of using Justin Trudeau and his father, Pierre Trudeau, is that these were the only 2 prime ministers in Canadian history to use the Emergencies Act. They enacted a law that temporarily did away with the Constitution, if you will, the Canadian version of it. And this is a symbolism for what is coming with the coming explosion. The Richard Nixon prophecy, as I'm explaining here, points to, through the bomb train and everything like I explained, it points to this coming explosion, which will be followed by martial law. And that's why God pointed to or used Pierre Trudeau and Justin Trudeau and their enacting of the Emergencies Act. And on the subject of the Emergencies Act in 2022, the other video that is one of my favorites is the truckers' protest video. One must watch that video. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, Please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.